Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. My girlfriend and I were out in the desert for the weekend. We'd driven down Friday afternoon to this remote canyon in southern Utah. No official campground, just one of those turnoffs off a dirt road where you can park and hike in a bit. The kind of place where you won't see another soul for miles. That's why we picked it. She wanted to do some night photography, and I just wanted to get away from people for a while. We set up camp in a shallow dip between two rock walls, maybe half a mile from where we left the car. No cell service, no signs, just open sky and dry brush and sandstone. We got the tent up by sundown and made dinner on the little camp stove, then hiked up a nearby ridge once it got dark to see the stars. The view was insane. No light pollution, just this huge dome of sky. It almost didn't look real. She set up her camera on the tripod and started taking long exposures. I lay back on the rock with my arms behind my head, just watching the sky. For a while we were quiet, and then she started pointing out constellations, trying to remember which was which. I don't know any of them, but she was getting into it, using her phone to double check. We were maybe 30 minutes into it when I noticed this one star off to the east that looked a little brighter than the others. It wasn't doing anything weird at first, just seemed to twinkle a bit more than the rest. I figured it was maybe a planet, Jupiter or Venus or something. But the more I stared at it, the more I started thinking it was, I don't know, out of place. It didn't match the rest of the pattern around it. Like it was too low or just too bright, like it was trying to look like a star and not quite pulling it off. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to sound paranoid or ruin the mood. But I kept glancing at it every few minutes, and after a while I realized it was no longer in the same spot. It had shifted. Just slightly, like half an inch to the right from my perspective, but enough that I was sure it wasn't just me. Stars don't move like that, not in real time. So I nudged her and said, "Hey, does that one look like it's moving to you?" She looked up, squinted, then said, "Which one?" I pointed, but already it was drifting again. Very slow, like a balloon maybe, or a satellite, except satellites don't do that either. It wasn't crossing the sky like the ISS, it was drifting like sideways through the stars. And it wasn't blinking like a plane. We both sat up and watched it. It kept moving slowly, deliberate, not random, and then it just stopped. Dead still. Right above this low ridge across from us. We stared at it for a long time. No sound, no flicker, just this one point of light, motionless now, way lower than any star should be. Then, out of nowhere, it shot straight upward. Not diagonally, not fading out, just vertical. So fast it left a faint trail behind it, like a comet's tail, except it vanished almost instantly. It didn't accelerate, it was just suddenly gone, like someone yanked it out of the sky with a string. We just sat there staring at where it had been. I remember my girlfriend saying, "What the hell was that?" and laughing a little, but it wasn't like a joke laugh, more nervous. I didn't say anything. I was still trying to wrap my head around what I saw. I wasn't scared yet, not really. Just confused. We stayed up there for another 20 minutes or so, hoping maybe it would come back, but nothing else moved. The sky went back to normal. We packed up her gear and climbed down in the dark with our headlamps on. I kept scanning the cliffs around us while we walked, even though I didn't know what I was looking for. When we got back to the tent, it was just after midnight. We stayed up a little while longer, talking about it. She kept trying to explain it away. Maybe it was a drone or some kind of military test. But I could tell she didn't believe herself. There was no way something like that would be that quiet, that far out in the middle of nowhere and move like that. Eventually, we zipped up the tent and tried to sleep, but I kept hearing little noises outside. Twigs snapping, gravel shifting. I told myself it was just animals. Maybe a rabbit or a fox. But it felt like something was moving around us, just far enough away to stay out of sight. I didn't say anything to her. I didn't want her to panic. Around 2:30, I got up to pee. I didn't go far, just stepped outside the tent and walked to the edge of the clearing. While I was out there, I looked up again. Nothing weird at first. Same stars, same patterns. But then I noticed this really faint pulsing light on the ridge we'd climbed earlier. It wasn't bright, just a soft white flicker, like someone holding up a flashlight behind a sheet. No beam, just an occasional glow. It didn't have a rhythm. Sometimes it was two quick pulses, sometimes a long one. Then nothing for a full minute. I stood there way longer than I meant to, just watching it, trying to figure out what it could be. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no rustling, just the faint breeze moving through the brush. Eventually it stopped, just went dark like it had never been there. I waited another minute, then went back inside. She was asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't wake her. Next morning, I went back up there on my own while she made breakfast. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. No footprints, no gear, no signs of people. The ridge was empty. But I kept thinking about that light. It had been right where we'd stood when we saw the thing in the sky. We broke camp around noon and hiked back to the car. On the way out, I noticed something weird about the trail. The dirt near the car had a few marks on it. Straight lines, almost like someone had dragged something heavy across it. Not deep, but not natural either. My girlfriend said maybe it was from when we dragged our cooler out, but it wasn't in the right direction. These lines led into the brush, not away from it. She didn't want to talk about it much after that. We drove home, mostly in silence. She hasn't brought it up since, and I haven't either. I still don't really know what we saw or what any of it meant, but I haven't been back out there. Not once. I still have the GPS coordinates saved, but I don't think I want to know what's out in that canyon. I was driving from Flagstaff to Bakersfield, taking the long way through the Mojave because I'd had enough of interstates and wanted a quieter route. It was just past 10 at night, maybe closer to 11. I remember because I was debating whether to stop somewhere or keep pushing through. I didn't have to be anywhere until the next afternoon, so I figured I'd drive until I got tired. I was somewhere past Ludlow, one of those stretches where you lose track of time because it's just flat road and empty desert, and your headlights picking out the same 50 feet over and over. No other cars, no signs, just a single-lane road and nothing else. The kind of silence that makes you lower the radio without even realizing it. The road had started to wind a bit, not sharp curves, but enough to keep me alert. I had the windows down to stay awake. Cool desert air coming in, dry and steady. I wasn't tired yet, but I was in that zone where your thoughts start to drift. I remember thinking about my old truck and whether I should replace the tires before winter. Dumb stuff. Then, somewhere past a big bend with no markers, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There were 3 lights behind me, faint, white-blue, all the same size and spaced evenly apart. Not headlights, too dim and too low, almost at the level of the road itself, but floating. Not high like a car's high beams and not spaced wide like a truck. They looked like orbs, not beams. No glow, just a soft presence. At first I thought it was a reflection, something bouncing off the glass. But when I tilted the mirror a little, they didn't move. They stayed locked in place, following. I stared at them for a few seconds, long enough to start drifting in my lane. When I corrected, I checked the side mirrors. Nothing. No lights behind me, but in the rear view, still there. Still floating low, still in perfect formation. I slowed down a little. Not much, just enough to see if they'd react. They didn't get closer or farther. They stayed exactly the same distance behind me, like they were matching speed. I pulled off the road a bit, just nudged onto the shoulder. No other cars had passed in over an hour, and there wasn't any real traffic to speak of. I figured I'd let them pass if it was someone screwing around with drones or something. I stopped and turned off my headlights. Engine still running. Then I looked in the mirror again. The lights were gone. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing came around the bend behind me. No sounds. No dust trail. Just that low, constant wind moving over the sand. I got out of the car, left the engine running, walked to the back and looked up and down the road. Nothing. No signs of anything. No power lines, no fences. I even walked into the middle of the road and stood there, just listening. It was totally silent. Then I heard a crackle. Not loud, more like static coming from inside the car. I thought maybe the radio was acting up, so I leaned into the window and turned the volume knob, but it was already off. The noise was still there, soft and irregular, like something brushing against a microphone. Then it stopped. I turned off the engine, trying to listen better, and everything went dead. No more static, just the sound of wind again. I waited another minute, maybe more. Then I got back in and kept driving. For a while, everything felt normal again. I didn't see the lights. The road was just as empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I kept checking the mirror every few seconds. I wasn't even thinking about it. It just became a reflex. About 10 minutes later, I started seeing movement on the side of the road. Not animals, not clear shapes, just shadows, like something ducking out of view when the headlights swept past. I told myself it was probably scrub or Joshua trees catching the wind, but a couple of times it looked like a figure crouching down, staying low. I didn't stop again. Then, without really noticing when it started, I realized I could see the three lights again. Not right behind me this time, off to the left. In the desert, maybe 50 yards out, gliding along at the same pace as my car, still equidistant, still low to the ground. No beams, no visible source, just faint glowing points, moving over the terrain like it wasn't even there. I slowed down to about 40. They kept pace. I sped up to 60. Same thing, always off to the side, just behind my peripheral vision. When I turned my head to look, they were gone. But when I looked forward again, they'd drift back into my edge of vision. It was like they didn't want to be looked at directly. Eventually, the road curved again and dipped into a small canyon. The terrain got tighter, rockier. I lost sight of the lights completely. They didn't come back. That should have been a relief, but it made me more anxious, like I'd lost track of something that had been watching me. I stopped again a little after midnight to get some water from the back seat. When I opened the door, the dome light flickered twice and didn't come on. Not burned out, just didn't activate. The dashboard lights were still on, but faint, like the battery was dying, even though the engine was fine. I closed the door, waited, tried the dome light switch manually, nothing. I got out the flashlight I keep in the glove box and aimed it around. The air felt heavier somehow, still dry, still cool, but like something was pressing down a little. Then I noticed this faint humming. Not loud, not even rhythmic, just a low vibration like a power line or an engine idling far away. But there were no power lines out there, nothing man-made at all. The sound faded when I stepped a few feet away from the car, then came back when I moved closer again. I crouched down and put my hand on the ground, couldn't feel anything. The sound was in the air, not the earth. I checked under the car, around the wheels, nothing. No leaks, no damage. But that hum kept going, just barely there, like it was circling me. I got back in and drove without stopping again until I hit Barstow. There were no more lights, no figures, no sound. But I couldn't stop glancing in the mirror the whole way. Even after I hit the city lights, I kept checking, every few seconds, like part of me expected to see those three faint points, perfectly spaced, floating behind me again. The call came in just after lunch. A guy in his 30s had checked into the trail register at the South Rim Loop 2 days earlier, but never signed out. His car was still in the parking lot that morning. Solo hiker. Light gear, no planned overnights. Pretty standard missing persons start. I'd done these searches before, so I didn't expect anything weird. Most people just got turned around or took a bad fall. Sometimes you'd find them huddled under a tree and dehydrated and embarrassed. That's what I figured this would be. We started sweeping the area with a couple volunteers from Search and Rescue. It was late September, leaves coming down, weather mild, good conditions. We split the loop into sections, and I took the North Ridge. Midway through the first day, I got a ping from the emergency services dispatcher. The missing guy had rented a personal GPS beacon from an outfitter in Flagstaff. Turned out it had gone active that morning, around 10:47 a.m., but it wasn't sending a distress signal, just a location update. They forwarded me the coordinates, and I hiked over to the spot. Took maybe 40 minutes. The signal wasn't moving. When I got close, I started looking around for signs. Dropped gear, broken branches, anything. But it was quiet. Real still. That weird kind of still where you start hearing your own breath too loud. Then my phone buzzed again, another GPS update, same exact location. I checked my offline map and looked up. The coordinates landed me in a small clearing, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by pine and fir. Nothing remarkable, except the signal was 30 feet above ground level. At first, I figured it had to be a glitch. GPS isn't perfect, sometimes the elevation's off, but when I stood under the spot and used my receiver to triangulate, it kept locking on to that exact height. I even walked in circles a few times to double check. Same reading every time. I called it in. The dispatcher asked me to wait and keep eyes on the area while they got someone to bring climbing gear. In the meantime, I started scanning the trees for any signs of the device or a body. There wasn't anything. No movement. No birds either, now that I thought about it. That struck me as odd. Usually there's some kind of sound, squirrels, wind in the branches, the occasional hawk, but it was dead silent. I started getting this feeling like I was being watched. It didn't feel like nerves, more like something was aware of me but staying just out of sight. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see someone standing there. I even called out once, just to be sure. No answer. About 15 minutes later, the climbing guy radioed in. He was still a ways out. I didn't want to waste time, so I walked the perimeter again. Eyes up. Still no sign of anything hanging, snagged, or stuck. No parachute cords, no bags. The trees weren't that dense up high, so if something was caught in the branches, I probably would have seen it. I tossed a pine cone straight up toward the coordinates, just to see if it hit anything. Nothing. Just sailed through and came back down. Then I noticed something else. My radio, which had been working fine, started picking up this faint distortion. Not loud, just a kind of soft feedback whenever I keyed the mic, almost like a delay or echo. Nobody else reported issues, and it went away the second I stepped outside the clearing. Came back when I re-entered. Same thing with my phone. GPS froze, bars dropped, battery dropped from 82% to 56% in maybe 5 minutes. I put it on airplane mode to stop it draining. The climbing guy arrived about 20 minutes later. We went over the readings and tried to figure out if there was a branch or platform we'd missed. Nothing matched up. He got harnessed and climbed the nearest tree, anchoring to a thick limb that was about the right height. He swept the area with binoculars, flashlight, even held out a net pole to see if he could make contact with something unseen. Nothing. He stayed up there for about 10 minutes, then came down, said he didn't feel great. Headache, a little nauseous, not altitude sickness. We weren't anywhere near high enough. He said the air felt thick, like there was pressure up there. Hard to describe, but it made him uncomfortable. We decided to set a motion cam on a high tripod facing the spot, just in case whatever was causing the readings became visible. We marked the location and planned to check it again first thing the next morning. That night, the motion cam sent 3 alerts around 2:30 a.m. The images were blank, just trees and darkness. No motion, no heat signatures. But the GPS ping from the missing guy's beacon went dead at 2:44 a.m. Just stopped broadcasting entirely. No low battery signal, no fade out, just nothing. We went back at sunrise. The clearing was the same, still quiet, still off. The motion cam's battery was fine, but it wouldn't power on, just dead weight. We spent most of the day sweeping outward from that spot, thinking maybe the beacon had been dropped or thrown. No trace. The elevation reading never changed before it cut off. It stayed at 30 feet the entire time it was active. Eventually, the official search was called off. No sign of the hiker, no gear, no clothing, no prints, nothing. 2 weeks later, I got curious and went back on my day off. Just wanted to see if the place still felt the same. I didn't tell anyone, just parked a few miles out and hiked in solo. It looked identical, same trees, same clearing, but it didn't feel the same. The stillness was gone. Birds were back, wind in the branches, the kind of natural noise you're used to in the forest. I stood in the center for a while and looked up. Didn't see anything, but I kept thinking about that GPS tracker, how it stayed in one exact spot, hovering above ground for over an hour before going dark, and how whatever it was never made a sound. This happened 2 winters ago up near Mount Baker. I usually do solo hikes in the shoulder seasons, especially late February when things are still quiet but not completely buried. I'm not big on ski traffic, so I picked trails that stay off the radar, stuff where you're not going to pass 5 families with dogs every mile. That trip, I was doing a 3-day loop through a section of backcountry I hadn't been through before. It was supposed to be mellow, nothing technical, just cold and remote. The first day was uneventful. I parked at the trailhead around 10 in the morning, snowshoes strapped on by 10:30. There was maybe a foot and a half of snow at the base, but it was hard-packed and easy to follow. No signs of recent hikers. The sky was that solid pale gray, like it was stuck between snow and sun. I made it to the first ridge by early afternoon, set up camp just before dusk in a tree-sheltered spot with a view of a valley below. Slept fine. The next morning, I took my time breaking camp. The plan was to follow an old logging road that curved along the base of a slope, cut through a long clearing that paralleled the creek, then veer uphill to find a flat spot for the second night. It wasn't marked on any recent trail maps, but I'd seen it on satellite images, a wide, open space about the length of a football field, probably an old avalanche runout or blowdown. It took longer to reach than I expected. The snow got deeper, and even with snowshoes, I was slogging. No sign of animals, no tracks, nothing. The only sounds were my own boots crunching and the occasional creak of trees shifting above. I hadn't seen another person since I left the parking lot. The higher I climbed, the more that quiet started to press in. It wasn't peaceful quiet, just dead silence. No wind, no birds, nothing. I got to the clearing around 3. You come up over a small rise, then it opens out suddenly in front of you, maybe 200 feet wide, completely flat, ringed by old pines on 3 sides and a low ridge on the 4th. The snow was untouched, not even deer prints. I was about to keep walking when I noticed something off near the center. From a distance, it just looked like a darker patch. No color, really, just slightly off-white compared to the rest of the snow. I assumed it was ice, maybe where some runoff had frozen over. But when I got closer, I stopped walking. It wasn't ice. It was bare ground, a perfect circle, maybe 12 feet across, no snow at all inside it. Just dead grass and a little dirt totally exposed, and the edges were sharp, like someone had traced it with a compass. I stood maybe 20 feet away, just staring at it. There were no tracks leading in or out, not mine, not animal, nothing. And it hadn't melted out gradually. There was no slush, no water pooling around the edge. Just snow and then not snow. I walked the perimeter, keeping about 10 feet away, circled it once. The air around it didn't feel warmer, but I took off a glove and held my hand out anyway. Nothing. No heat, no weird smell, just open ground in the middle of a snow-covered clearing. I crouched down and looked closely at the grass. It was flat, like it had been pressed down but not broken. No footprints, no signs of a tarp or gear, no ash, no burn marks. Just dry, exposed earth in a perfect circle. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not moving, just looking at it. It was quiet enough that I could hear the blood in my ears. I had this stupid thought, like if I stepped into it, something would change. Not something specific, just change. I didn't. I backed away. That was when I noticed something else. On the far side of the clearing, almost directly across from where I stood, there was a tree. A tall pine with a broken top, maybe 50 feet up. I wouldn't have paid any attention, but the bark on one side had been stripped off. A clean, vertical line, maybe 2 feet wide and 10 feet tall. Just bare wood, pale and smooth, like it had been shaved. I don't know how that happens in winter. It wasn't lightning, no scorch marks, and the tree looked healthy otherwise. It was just peeled, like something had dragged a blade straight down it. I didn't sleep that night. I found a spot about half a mile back down the slope, set up my tent in a small stand of trees, and kept the fly open so I could see out. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention, even though I couldn't explain what I thought I might be drawing attention from. I just felt off, like I was being watched, but not constantly. More like something would check in every so often. I'd sit there feeling okay, and then suddenly be certain that something was out there, just past the trees, standing still. It snowed lightly around midnight, just a dusting. In the morning, I packed up fast. I didn't eat, didn't even heat water. I just wanted to get out. I didn't look back toward the clearing. The weirdest part, or maybe the most concrete part, is that when I made it back to the clearing's edge just before the slope dipped down, I glanced back without meaning to. That circle, still there. Same size, same spot. But now it had a ring of frost around the edge. A perfect white border, like it had been outlined. I moved fast after that. Didn't stop for breaks. I think I made the descent in half the time it had taken me to go up. I don't remember seeing anything else strange, but I also wasn't looking. Every gust of wind felt like footsteps. Every tree shift sounded like a voice right on the edge of hearing. When I got back to my car, I checked my phone. No service, of course, but the time was right, except the battery was way lower than it should have been. It was nearly full when I left camp. Now it was at 12% and I hadn't used it once. I plugged it in as soon as I got a signal and checked my GPS history. The last ping was from around 3:12 p.m. the day before, right when I'd reached the clearing. After that, nothing until the morning I left. I had the tracker app running, and I'd used it on dozens of hikes before. It never stopped unless I closed it. I didn't. I've done a lot of hiking since then. More remote, more solo. I haven't seen anything like that circle again, but I also haven't gone back to that part of the mountain. I kept telling myself I would. I even mapped out a day hike to swing by from the other direction. But when it came down to it, I didn't go. Something about it just stuck wrong, like it wasn't meant to be found. I was 16 when it happened. It was summer break, and I'd gotten really into photography, mostly long exposure stuff, star trails, time lapses, that kind of thing. My parents live out in the sticks, so we don't have much light pollution. You get these amazing clear views of the Milky Way on the right nights. I used to drag a lawn chair out behind the shed, set up my tripod in the open field, and just let the camera go while I listened to music. That night was supposed to be perfect for it. Clear skies, no moon, warm but not humid. I set up around 9 Canon T6i on a tripod, kit lens pointed straight up. I set the intervalometer to shoot one frame every 10 seconds for 3 hours. I figured I'd stitch them together the next day and see if I caught any meteors or satellites. It's not like I sit there and stare up the whole time. I mostly scrolled my phone and looked up every now and then. It was uneventful. Couple planes, a few shooting stars, nothing unusual. I packed up around midnight and went inside. The next morning, I dumped the shots into my laptop, over 1,000 frames. I started flipping through them quick just to get a feel for the sequence. The stars moved just like they should, smooth rotation, nice trails. But about halfway in, there was this one frame that didn't make any sense. It was completely black, not overexposed or glitched. The stars were just gone, all of them. Like something massive had blocked them out. I thought it might be a cloud at first, but when I zoomed in, it wasn't that. The edges weren't soft or diffused. They were sharp. Not perfectly clean, but too defined to be fog or mist. And it wasn't the lens cap or anything stupid like that. I had a frame before and after that were totally normal. I isolated the 3 frames, the normal one before, the blacked out one, and the normal one after. 10 seconds between each. That thing, whatever it was, had to have passed over and out of frame in under 20 seconds. I kept going back and forth between them. The stars just disappeared. Whole constellations gone. Like a section of sky got erased, and then it came back. The weirdest part was the shape. It wasn't circular like a balloon or drone. It wasn't a plane either. When I boosted the contrast and exposure, you could just barely make out this uneven, jagged outline. Almost like a mountain. That's the only word I can think of. Not symmetrical, not smooth, just huge and dark and there. I tried to remember if I'd heard anything when I was out there, a hum or a rush of wind or anything. But I hadn't. There was no sound. I didn't see the stars blink out in real time. If I hadn't looked at the photos, I never would have known anything had happened. Later that afternoon, I went back to the same spot and stood under where it would have passed. There was nothing to see. No burnt grass, no flattened weeds, no weird smells, just the same empty stretch of yard behind the shed. I looked up and tried to picture how big it must have been to blot out that much sky. It had to be enormous, like football field enormous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept getting up and checking out the back window. I thought maybe it'd come back. Or maybe it had always been coming and I just never noticed. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't want them thinking I was messing with weird conspiracy stuff again. A few years before that, I'd gone down a rabbit hole of space documentaries and got really into watching the ISS live feed. My dad still makes jokes about it. 2 days later, I set the camera up again. Same spot, same settings, same sky. I wanted to see if anything happened again. I let it run for 4 hours this time, just in case. Nothing. Not a single frame showed anything unusual. The stars moved, a few planes passed by, but no blackout. No shapes. After that, I tried a few more times over the next couple weeks, always around the same time of night, always from the same angle. Never saw anything again. One night, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that the frame was some camera glitch I didn't understand, but I uploaded it to a few photography forums and asked if anyone had seen something like that. Most people said it didn't look like a sensor issue. They agreed something had actually been between the lens and the stars. No one could say what. I didn't show the frame to anyone local. I didn't want word getting around that I was into UFO stuff or whatever. People around here already talk enough if you wear the wrong shoes to school. A few months later, I was going through the shots again and noticed something else. On the frame, right after the blackout, when the stars were back, there were two tiny points of light in the bottom left corner that hadn't been there before. They were close together, too close to be stars, and they weren't moving like a plane, just hovering. They were gone in the next frame. I hadn't seen them before because I'd been focused on the main blackout, but once I saw them, I couldn't unsee them. They were small, but definitely there. Same color temperature as stars, but not in the same place, not following the same path. That messed with me more than the big shape, honestly, because it meant there might have been more than one thing up there. After that, I stopped taking time lapses for a while. It just didn't feel fun anymore. I still have the camera, and I still shoot stuff sometimes, but never at night. Not from that spot. Once or twice, I thought about deleting the frame, but I always end up keeping it. I don't show it to people, I don't talk about it, but it's there. It was just after 4 in the morning when I saw the light. I'd gotten up early, like usual, to check on the cows. I don't sleep much these days, back pain mostly, and I like getting the chores started before the sun's up. That morning was clear, real still. No wind, no birds, nothing. The kind of quiet that almost makes your ears ring. I was halfway across the yard, heading to the barn, when I saw it. Off to the west, just above the tree line, it was this pale, bluish-white light, maybe the size of a full moon, just sitting there in the sky. I stopped walking, just stood there watching it. It wasn't blinking or moving like a plane, no red or green lights, just bright, steady, and completely silent. Then it started to drop. Not fast, but not slow either. Just this smooth, dead straight descent behind the trees on the far side of the north pasture. I thought maybe it was a flare or one of those drones kids fly around, but it didn't flicker or arc. It just went straight down and vanished behind the ridge. I stood there a while longer, waiting to see if anything else happened. Nothing did. The light was gone and everything stayed quiet. No sound of an engine, no smoke, no glow. I thought about walking out to the pasture, but I figured I'd wait until daylight. Whatever it wasn't my problem yet. I went on to the barn, fed the chickens, checked the feed bins. Everything was normal until I got to the east field. That's where the cows had been overnight. They've got plenty of space to move around, and usually by morning they're spread out, some near the trough, some by the trees, a few down by the creek. But this time they were all in the same place, packed up tight against the north fence. I mean tight, shoulder to shoulder, pressed right up against the wire like they were trying to push through it. 30-some animals just crammed together in this narrow strip. No movement, no lowing or grunting. Just standing there, eyes wide, breathing shallow. I've seen them get spooked before, coyotes, thunderstorms, even a hot air balloon once. But this was different. They weren't panicked. They weren't bolting or pacing. They were just still. I called out to them like I usually do, a little whistle and a "come on now," but not a single one turned to look at me. That was the part that really got me. Usually at least a few will flick their ears or glance over. Nothing. Just that same forward stare. I walked up slow, careful not to startle them. When I got close, I could see their eyes better. Real wide and glossy, the kind of look they get when they're about to calve or something seriously wrong. One of the younger heifers had foam around her mouth, just a little bit, like she'd been chewing and stopped partway through. I checked the fence line, thinking maybe something had gotten in during the night. A bear, maybe? Or some drunk kids messing around. But the wire was untouched. No prints, no broken brush, nothing. The ground was dewy but undisturbed, not even a scuff. I tried to lead one of them away, an older cow that usually follows me around, but she wouldn't budge, not even when I pulled at her halter. The rest didn't react either. No shifting, no sidestepping, just frozen. I backed off after a few minutes and stood there trying to figure out what I was looking at. The sun was just starting to rise, and that's when I noticed the birds. Or, I guess, the lack of them. Usually by that time, the crows up in the pines making a racket. We get red-winged blackbirds near the stream and jays closer to the barn. But that morning, there was nothing. Just dead quiet, like the sound had been turned off. I stayed with the cows for a couple more hours. Around 7:30, they finally started to move again. Not all at once, just a few shifting hooves, then a tail swish here, a snort there. Eventually, one turned its head, then another, and within maybe 15 minutes, they were back to normal, grazing, walking around, making noise, like nothing had happened. But the weird part is, they wouldn't go near the center of the field. There's this little hollow, maybe 10 yards wide, right in the middle of the pasture, usually one of their favorite spots, good grass, little shade. But that day, and for a few days after, they avoided it completely. Wouldn't even walk through it. I tried driving them across with the ATV, and they just looped around it like there was a wall. Later that afternoon, I walked out there myself. I didn't notice anything right away. The grass wasn't burned or crushed, no signs of anything having landed. But after standing there a while, I got this weird feeling in my chest. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, like being underwater. My ears popped too, even though the elevation hadn't changed. And when I walked back out of the hollow, the feeling stopped. I didn't say anything to the neighbors. I figured maybe it was a fluke or some weird weather thing I didn't understand. I didn't even tell my wife until a couple days later. She looked at me like I was trying to mess with her, but I wasn't joking. A week later, I had the vet out for the usual herd check. I didn't say anything about the incident. I just wanted to see if he noticed anything off. He didn't say much at first. Gave them all a once-over, took temps, checked eyes and gums, said they looked healthy overall, but then he asked if they'd been sick lately. I said no. He told me their heart rates were elevated, not dangerously so, but higher than normal. And a couple of them had these small abrasions inside their mouths, like they'd bitten down hard on something. He asked if there'd been a storm, or if maybe they'd gotten spooked. I said no, nothing like that. He just nodded and said to keep an eye on them. For the next month or so, everything was fine. They went back to their routines, spread out again, started using the hollow, but the birds didn't come back. Not to the trees by the north pasture, anyway. Still haven't, far as I can tell. And the deer stopped crossing through that part of the fence line, too. They used to leave tracks through the snow near the ridge. Now, they go around, there's a camera up on the barn roof, motion triggered, nothing fancy. I checked the footage from that morning. Between 4:10 and 4:20 a.m., the screen just goes white. No static, no blackout, just solid white for 10 minutes. Then it comes back like nothing happened. That's all I've got. I didn't report anything. I don't think it would have gone anywhere if I had. Nothing got damaged, nothing got taken. Just a weird light, some weird behavior, and then it stopped. But sometimes when I'm out there at night, I get this feeling, like something's watching from the tree line. Not all the time, just now and then. I'll turn and stare into the dark and wait for a sound, but there's nothing. Just the quiet and the cows, breathing slow and heavy in the field. I was 3 days into a solo hike through the Ouachita Mountains when it happened. I'd planned a 5-day loop, packed light, brought my tent, and figured I'd take my time. I'd done this route once before with a friend, but this time I wanted to go alone, clear my head. Work had been heavy. I just needed quiet. That third day was calm, clear skies, not too hot, no one on the trail. I didn't see a single person all morning, which wasn't unusual. Around mid-afternoon, I stopped on a ridge to rest and eat a granola bar. There was a good view of the valley below, lots of pine trees, a little creek winding through. The wind was light. I didn't hear anything but birds and the occasional rustle in the brush. I was sitting on this flat rock near the edge, just staring out, when I saw something move in the sky. At first, I thought it was a plane. It had that kind of glint when the sun hits the side just right, but then it jumped. That's the only word I can think of. It didn't fly across the sky, it reappeared. 1 second it was to the left of this ridgeline across the valley, then it was just suddenly farther right. Same altitude, same brightness, but in a completely new spot, like it had skipped frames in a video. I sat up straight and shaded my eyes. It looked like a sphere. Not spinning, not blinking, just silver and smooth, like a ball bearing floating way up there. No trail behind it, no sound. It stayed still for maybe 4 seconds, then vanished again, reappeared even farther to the right. I watched it do that maybe 6 times. Always a few seconds in one spot, then gone, then back somewhere new. It never moved diagonally or up or down, just perfectly horizontal, like it was sliding on a ruler in the sky, but only hitting certain marks, like it was following a path that didn't exist for anything else. After a minute or so, it was gone. Didn't reappear. I waited another 10 minutes before moving. I even got out my phone and took a video just in case it came back, but nothing showed up. The phone didn't glitch or anything, it was working fine, but I never caught it on camera. I kept hiking, and by evening I made camp near a little clearing off the trail. I built a small fire, boiled some water, and tried not to think about what I saw. I told myself it was a drone, maybe military, testing something weird. I've seen weird lights before, nothing like that, but enough to explain it away. But that night, things got stranger. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up without knowing why. No sound, no dream. I just opened my eyes. The fire was out, the tent was cold. I stayed still and listened. It was dead quiet. No insects, no wind, nothing. That's when I noticed the light. Not bright, but there was this faint glow filtering through the tent walls. It wasn't moonlight, it was too white, almost bluish, and steady, not pulsing, not moving. Just this pale, silent glow. I sat up and unzipped the door, real slow. My boots were right outside, and I could see enough to tell that everything looked normal. But the light was coming from deeper in the woods, maybe 50 yards out. It didn't cast shadows exactly. It was more like a fog of light, if that makes sense. Dim but heavy. I didn't go toward it. I just sat in the tent entrance for a long time, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, watching. It didn't move. Nothing moved. Then, as gradually as it had appeared, it faded. Not all at once. It just sort of dimmed until the trees were black again. Eventually, the bugs came back. First a cricket, then a few more, then the normal nighttime hum returned, like someone unmuted the world. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept thinking about the sphere and wondering if the two things were connected. I didn't hear any machines, no helicopters, just silence. The next day I packed up early and hiked faster than usual. I didn't want to stay another night. About 6 miles from where I camped, I found something that stopped me cold. There was this dead tree off the trail, maybe 10 feet tall, no leaves. Right beside it, on the dirt, were 3 perfect circles. Not burn marks, more like impressions. Each maybe 2 feet wide, spaced evenly, like something had been resting on them. The dirt wasn't disturbed otherwise. No footprints, no tracks in or out, just 3 shallow, round dents pressed down into the soil like they'd been there for a while. I stood there staring at them for probably 5 minutes. I even dropped my pack and walked a slow circle around them. I touched one, dry dirt, packed tight. The grass around them hadn't grown back, like whatever made them had been heavy enough to crush the ground flat. That was enough for me. I didn't stop again, except to drink water. I made it back to my car by sundown. Checked my phone, no missed calls, no weird photos, everything normal. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the sky. I didn't see the sphere again. No lights, no glitches, just clouds and stars. I never saw anything like that before or since. But sometimes I catch myself looking out the window at night, like maybe I'll see that silver flicker again, jumping across the sky like it's skipping through space that doesn't belong to us. I was a highway patrol officer in northern Nevada for a little over 10 years. Most of it was routine. Long stretches of empty roads, speeders, the occasional drunk, quiet work mostly, long hours, especially on night shift. This happened in January 2019. I remember the date because it snowed that afternoon and we'd had a rollover just south of Battle Mountain. I worked swing shift and stayed out a little late finishing paperwork in my cruiser. Around 2:30 a.m., I started heading back to the station, taking a long loop on a service road that runs parallel to I-80. That road barely gets used. No streetlights, no traffic, just flat sagebrush and a few old fence lines. I drove slow because of the black ice, maybe 45 tops. My dash cam was running the whole time like usual. Nothing stood out during the drive. I didn't pass anyone. No lights in the distance, no animals. It was a still, clear night, and you can usually see headlights coming for miles. I remember glancing in my rearview mirror once or twice and seeing nothing but darkness. I got back to the station just after 3 a.m., parked, and went inside to finish the rest of my shift. Nothing unusual. Didn't even think about the drive. The weird part didn't start until later that week. Every Friday, we do a basic check on our dash cam units. Make sure the footage synced, nothing glitched, that kind of thing. My sergeant asked if I could pull mine up from that Tuesday night, since I'd been out the latest. I loaded the file from 2 to 3, fast-forwarded through most of it, but something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, just 2 little dots of light behind my cruiser. Faint, but clear. Headlights. They showed up on the footage around 2:41 a.m. I paused the video and sat there for a second, trying to think back. I hadn't seen any headlights. I would have remembered if someone was following me out there, especially that close. But in the footage, they stayed right behind me for several minutes, not tailgating, just pacing me, maybe 100 yards back. I scrubbed through the next few minutes. The lights stayed behind me the whole time, never closing in, never falling back. I checked my side mirrors in the footage. Nothing, not a single glint, just blackness. But in the dash cam, those lights were there. At 2:48 a.m., the road bends slightly to the left around an old drainage ditch. I remember that stretch clearly because there's a row of old wooden posts and I always slow down there in case of ice. In the footage, I dipped slightly left, same as always. The lights behind me dipped too, and then they were gone. No pass, no fade. They just blinked out like someone flipped a switch. One frame they were there, the next they weren't. I rewound and played it again, slower. Still the same. They trailed me for almost 7 minutes, then disappeared at that bend. I kept watching the footage, but nothing else stood out. Just me, driving the rest of the way alone. I checked the timestamp again. The lights were first visible at 2:41:13 and vanished at 2:48:06. I looked at the speed I was doing, about 43 miles per hour, the whole time. That meant whoever it was would have had to stay perfectly paced behind me, without headlights visible in my mirrors, for 7 minutes. Then, vanish. I pulled up the rear camera too, same story. Lights in the distance, following, then gone. But again, nothing showed in the mirrors. We use decent equipment. The cameras are mounted high with night vision. They record continuously. There's no chance those lights came from inside the car. No reflection, no interior glare. I brought my sergeant in and showed him the segment. He just watched quietly and said, maybe it was a logging truck or someone hunting jackrabbits. But he knew that stretch. It's fenced off and not near any turnouts or access roads. Plus, if it was a vehicle, it should have shown in my side mirrors. It didn't. I asked if the unit had any lens flare issues. He shook his head, said it had been serviced 2 weeks earlier. I kept thinking about the angle. How could the camera catch headlights that I couldn't see with my own eyes? I replayed it over and over, slowing it down, watching the mirrors, the dash, the road. Everything looked normal, just those lights hanging back in the dark. I asked dispatch to check if any other units were in that area at the same time. Nothing. Checked 911 logs for that night. No calls, no breakdowns, no activity at all on that stretch. I even went back out there the next night. Same time, same route. I parked for a while near that bend. Nothing happened. No cars, no lights, just empty road and cold wind. I watched the footage from that night too. No lights behind me at all, not even a distant glow. The thing that stuck with me was how steady the lights were. Never bouncing, never flickering. Just two solid points, low to the ground, like normal headlights. But they never swayed or changed distance, even over uneven road. I've driven that stretch hundreds of times. If someone was out there with a vehicle, I would have seen them. Or heard something. But there was nothing, just those lights following for 7 minutes, then gone. I kept the footage. It's saved in a private folder. I didn't file an incident report. There wasn't anything to report, really. No crime, no damage. Just something that doesn't make sense. It never happened again. I worked as a satellite technician for a small private contractor outside Albuquerque. Most of the job was back-end stuff. Signal testing, realignment, diagnostics. Boring, mostly. Lots of sitting in front of a screen, looking at data streams and noise. The kind of work where the strangest thing you see is usually just a bug in the code or a hardware hiccup. This happened in March 2021. I was pulling a solo overnight shift. Our team rotated nights every couple weeks, and that Thursday, it landed on me. The building was empty except for me and a janitor who usually came through around midnight and left by 2. At about 1:14 a.m., I was running a scheduled calibration on one of the least band communication relays we help maintain. Low orbit, slow drift, used mostly for weather telemetry. While I was watching the signal strength graph, the feed stuttered. Just for a split second. Not a full drop, just a hiccup in the stream. Normally that just means a ground station somewhere had interference or the satellite rolled a little weird, but then I saw the waveform spike. It wasn't noise, it was structured, a clean signal. I paused the process and scrolled back. Buried in the carrier feed was a brief transmission, 5 distinct tones. Each one lasted exactly 1 second. Sharp, pure, no distortion. Then a half-second pause, and the same 5 tones again. Then silence. I isolated the waveform and ran it through a couple tools just to make sure it wasn't crosstalk or bleed from a known broadcast. Nothing matched. I checked the source timing and pinpointed the origin based on signal delay and angle, somewhere in the lower atmosphere. About 40,000 feet up, give or take, which immediately didn't make sense. That frequency range is supposed to be satellite exclusive. Nothing below orbit is allowed to broadcast on it. Military, commercial, doesn't matter. It's protected space. I opened the FAA tracker. Nothing was in that airspace. No planes, no balloons, not even stray weather drones. That corridor was totally empty at the time. I listened to the tones again. They were mechanical, but not harsh. Kind of like a synth piano, clean and almost pleasant, but unnervingly exact. No background noise, no modulation or carrier stamp. Just 10 tones, 5 repeated. I ran a full diagnostic on the equipment to rule out error. Everything checked out, logs were clean. The weirdest part was how brief it was. The signal just inserted itself cleanly into a scheduled downlink, played twice, and disappeared. No other interference before or after. It didn't affect the satellite itself, didn't corrupt the data stream, just slotted in like it belonged there. By then it was around 1:30 a.m. I exported the clip and checked the timestamp again. Exactly 48. Exactly 12 seconds. I was tired, but not out of it. I replayed the transmission a dozen times. Tried matching the tones to anything I could think of. Musical notes, alert codes, calibration pings. Nothing lined up. I even checked historical logs to see if anything similar had happened before. I went back 3 years. Nothing even close. At around 2 a.m., I stepped outside for some air. The janitor's truck was gone. The parking lot was empty, just dead quiet. I stood there for a while looking up. The stars were clear, real bright that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed overhead. Not a plane. Just something. I went back in and filed a soft log under signal anomaly, which is what we do when something doesn't fit but isn't causing problems. No one really follows up on those unless it repeats or crashes a system, but I didn't delete the audio. I saved it locally and emailed it to myself, just in case. Later that morning, when the day shift came in, I casually asked if anyone had ever heard of a transmission like that coming through on a satellite downlink. No one had. Most of them didn't really care. These guys had seen all kinds of weird signal glitches over the years, and this didn't trip any alarms. That afternoon, I checked the FAA logs again, just to be sure. Nothing. No record of any aircraft, manned or unmanned, in that airspace at that time. The thing that kept bothering me was how precise the signal was. It didn't sound like a test or an error. It was intentional. The spacing, the length of each tone, it felt like it was trying to be noticed. A couple nights later, I stayed late to run some of my own analysis on the tones. I didn't mention it to anyone. I used a spectrogram to break them down. Each one was pure, single frequency, no harmonics. Perfect sine waves. That's not natural. That doesn't happen by accident. The frequencies didn't match standard tones either. They weren't A440 or anything else on a musical scale. Just 5 distinct pitches on 11 and 10 hertz, 1580 hertz, 940 hertz, 1310 hertz, and 1780 hertz. Then the same 5 again. I tried plotting them on a graph, thinking maybe it would form a pattern. The spacing wasn't random, but I couldn't make sense of it. Not mathematically. After that, I kind of dropped it. It wasn't part of my job to figure it out, and nobody else seemed to care. But every once in a while, when I had downtime, I'd pull the clip back up and listen again. I never got used to how clean it was. No static, no bleed, just those tones sitting neatly in the stream like they were always supposed to be there. It never happened again. It was the April eclipse a couple years ago. I was living in Idaho at the time, just outside of Salmon. I didn't have plans to go anywhere special for it, but we were right in the path of totality, so I figured I'd just drive up into the hills behind the house and watch it from there. I brought my camera, a blanket, and one of those cardboard eclipse glasses they'd been giving out at the library. I hiked up a little ridge that gave me a clear view of the sky and set up around 10 in the morning. I had my Nikon with me, not a professional setup or anything, just a D3500 I'd used for hiking photos. I had a solar filter on it that I bought on Amazon, nothing fancy. Mostly I just wanted a few shots for fun, nothing serious. It started like normal. The temperature dropped, the light got weird, everything looked sort of drained of color. I remember the wind stopped, which felt strange at the time, but probably wasn't. I kept taking photos every few minutes as the sun got smaller. There were some other people on the next ridge over, but I couldn't hear them. Everything felt quiet in a way that made me a little nervous, like being underwater. When totality hit, I got a couple shots without the filter on, just a fast burst. I'd practiced it before, just in case. The sun looked incredible. That ring, the way the sky turned dark, but not nighttime dark, it was surreal. I snapped a few more frames, then just sat back and watched the rest with my glasses on. After it ended, I packed up and walked back to my car. Everything felt a little off, but I figured that was just the eclipse high people talk about. I didn't look through the photos until later that night. I was sitting on the couch, going through them on my laptop. Most were fine, some overexposed, some out of focus, but a few decent ones in there. Then I got to this one. It was taken right at the start of totality, maybe a second before I took off the filter. The sun is partially blocked, and everything looks how it should, except there's this shape cutting across it. Not in front of the eclipse itself, more like off to the upper right edge of the disk. It's sharp. Almost a triangle, but not exactly. The edges don't blur like a bird or a bug in motion. They're too clean, and the angle's strange, like it's tilted forward and to the side at the same time. I zoomed in thinking maybe it was a bird or something close to the lens, but it didn't look like anything I'd seen before. No wings, no blur, no motion lines, just a dark, solid shape, like someone had cut a wedge out of the sky with a razor. I checked the frame before and after. The one before, nothing. Clear sky, partial sun. The one after, also clear. The shape's just gone. It doesn't fade or move. It's just there in one frame and gone in the next. That's when I started feeling weird. I backed up and went through the burst series slowly. Every frame, one after the other. Only that one had the shape. It didn't feel like a glitch. It wasn't a lens flare either. It cast a perfect clean line across the edge of the sun. It actually blocked part of the light. I don't know how else to explain it. I sat there staring at it for a while. Then I checked the metadata. The 2 frames were less than a second apart, like 0.8 of a second. That thing had appeared and vanished between 2 shots, and there was nothing else wrong with the camera or the files. I tried editing it, boosting the contrast, adjusting levels. Nothing made it clearer, but it didn't go away either. It wasn't an artifact. It was in the image. Solid. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the sky during totality, how quiet everything had been. I kept wondering if anyone else caught it too. The next day I drove back up to the ridge just to walk around. I don't know what I expected. There was nothing up there, no footprints besides mine, no broken branches, no trash, nothing out of place. But the silence felt heavier, like the day before had left something behind. I stayed maybe 20 minutes before heading back down. A few days later, I emailed the photo to a friend of mine who does wildlife photography. I didn't say anything about what I thought it was, just asked if she could tell what might have flown through the shot. She zoomed in and replied that it didn't look like any bird she knew, and the lines were too straight for an insect that close. She asked if I'd messed with the file. I hadn't. I thought about posting it online, but I didn't. I don't know why. It felt personal. I didn't want to invite weird speculation. I didn't want people telling me it was a drone or a smudge or something in the lens. I cleaned the lens that morning. The shots before and after are clean. Weeks went by. I stopped thinking about it as much, but I kept the file on my desktop. Once in a while I'd open it and zoom in, just to see if it still looked the same. It always did. Just that wedge-shaped hole in the sky. Then, about a month later, I was sitting outside at dusk watching the sky like I sometimes do. No eclipse, no camera. Just sitting there, and out of nowhere the wind died. Just stopped, like someone cut it off with a switch. The birds went quiet too. No cars, no dogs, just dead air. It only lasted maybe a minute, and then everything came back. But it felt exactly like that moment before totality. I went back inside and didn't go out again that night. I was out riding alone near Watson Lake. This was last February, early in the month before the real deep cold settled in. I worked part-time with a logging outfit, but that day was just for me. I like to ride out past the cleared zones, into the bush where it's quiet, no tracks but mine. It clears my head. The sun had been out in the morning, but by noon it clouded over. The temperature was sitting around -22, colder with wind chill. Not bad for this time of year. I'd layered up, brought enough gas, backup food, gear. I wasn't doing anything risky, just a loop I'd done a few times before, cutting west along a ridgeline, then back down along a creek bed. The snow up top was perfect, powdery, untouched. I remember noticing that, thinking how smooth everything looked, just wide open white under low gray clouds. I rode for maybe an hour and a half, made good time. I wasn't in a rush. I stopped once to drink some tea from my thermos and check my GPS. Then I came over this ridge and saw it. There was a stand of trees, maybe 20 or so, birch and spruce mostly, growing in a near-perfect circle right near the top. And inside that circle, the snow was completely gone. Just bare ground, frozen soil, and dead needles. Not even patches of snow in the shade. No tracks either, no animal sign, nothing disturbed. Just dry ground. Steam was rising from the center. I killed the engine and just sat there for a second, staring at it. It didn't make sense. Everything around me was frozen solid. The snow under my sled was knee-deep, dry, squeaky, but inside that circle, it looked like early spring. I couldn't hear anything. No wind, no birds, just the ticking sound from my engine cooling off. I got off the sled and walked closer, but not into it. Maybe 10 feet from the edge. The heat coming off it was real. Strong enough that I felt it on my face, like standing near a campfire that's just coals now, steady but not flickering. The air was humid too, like it is around hot springs, except this wasn't wet. The ground wasn't muddy, it looked dry, just warm enough to push off steam where it touched the snow line. I didn't take off my gloves, but I pulled one finger out and held it into the circle. It was warm. Not hot, not burning, just wrong. Too warm for where I was. Too even. I walked the perimeter. It was maybe 40 feet across. Nothing inside looked burnt or dead. The trees weren't scorched. If anything, they looked healthier than the ones outside, like greener, fuller. Even the bark seemed smoother. I didn't go in. I wanted to. Part of me wanted to step right into the middle and stand there, see if it felt different. But I didn't. I don't have a reason, just something about it made me stop. My stomach got tight. like the feeling you get when you're about to slip on ice but haven't yet. I took a picture on my phone, but later it just looked like bad contrast. You couldn't see the steam, and the ground looked the same color as the rest, just darker, like shadow. Not how it looked in person. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. The warmth wasn't changing, it wasn't spreading or fading, just the same steady steam. I didn't smell anything either. No smoke, no sulfur, just cold air and that weird, clean heat. Then I heard something. Not a noise, exactly, more like a change in pressure. Like when someone opens a window across the house and the air shifts. My ears popped. That was it, just a single pop, and the trees inside the circle all moved slightly. Like something passed through them, but there was no wind. I got back on my sled and started it fast. I didn't gun it, didn't panic, just eased away and back down the ridge. I kept glancing behind me, but nothing changed. The circle stayed where it was. The steam didn't follow. Once I was a good half-mile down, I stopped again. Checked my GPS. I dropped a pin so I could find the spot again if I wanted to. The device said I'd gained about 100 feet of elevation in the last minute, which didn't make sense. I was heading downhill. I reset it and kept riding. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling off. Not sick, just out of sync. Like I couldn't tell how far I'd gone or how long I'd been moving. My GPS wasn't updating properly. It showed me sitting still even when I was moving. I checked the time on it and on my watch. They were off by 6 minutes. Not a huge gap, but they'd been synced that morning. The wind picked up not long after that. Real sharp gusts, loud in my helmet. The snow started drifting in ways that made visibility worse than it should have been. I recognized the terrain, but it didn't feel right. I knew I was close to the tree line near the logging road, but I didn't see any markers I usually passed. No flagged stumps, no tire tracks. Eventually, I spotted the cut trail again and followed it back toward my truck. I didn't calm down until I could see the road. By then, the GPS had corrected itself, mostly. The time was still off, but only by a minute. I loaded up and sat in the cab with the heater on, trying to write down everything I remembered. I checked the photo again. It still didn't look like what I saw, just an odd patch of trees. I almost deleted it, but kept it just in case. The next morning, I went back to the pin I dropped. There was no circle, no steam, just smooth, untouched snow. The trees were there, but the ground was buried. I walked around trying to match what I remembered. Nothing felt warm. I dug a little with my gloves, maybe 6 inches down, just snow, then hard earth. I marked a tree and left. I haven't seen it again. My girlfriend and I were camping out near the Mojave, about 20 miles off the main highway. It was early April, not too hot during the day and chilly at night, but manageable. We'd camped before, mostly up north, but this was our first desert trip. The plan was to hike a little, stargaze, and just get out of cell service for a while. We drove my 4Runner down an old service road that cut through BLM land. No signage, no fences, just open land and low scrub. We didn't see another soul after leaving the pavement. Around dusk, we found a flat spot backed up to a rock formation. Good windbreak, solid ground not too far from where we parked. We set up the tent, rolled out the sleeping bags, ate some jerky and canned beans, the usual. No fire. We'd brought a camp stove but didn't use it that night. Just ate cold and watched the stars come out. It was crazy clear. I don't think I've ever seen the sky like that before. We laid there outside the tent for a while, just watching. Planes every now and then, satellites. Everything was normal. We turned in around 10 or 11. No animals, no wind, no noise at all, really. It got cold fast, but we'd brought good sleeping bags. I remember hearing one coyote far off before I fell asleep, but that was it. At some point during the night, I woke up. No noise woke me. I just opened my eyes. I was on my back, and I could see that the zipper on our tent door was open at the top, like 4 or 5 inches down from the peak. We'd closed it all the way before sleeping, I was sure of that. It was too cold not to. I sat up and looked around. My girlfriend was still asleep next to me, breathing steady. Nothing inside the tent looked disturbed. No bugs, no rustling, nothing missing. I didn't hear anything outside, but I still felt, I don't know, exposed. I leaned forward and zipped the door fully shut again, slow so I wouldn't wake her. Then I just sat there, listening. Not scared exactly, but alert. I stayed up maybe 20 minutes. There was nothing. No wind, no sounds, just that kind of dead silence you only get way out in places like that. Eventually, I laid back down and closed my eyes, but I don't think I really slept after that. When the sun came up, I was already awake. My girlfriend stirred next to me and asked if I'd unzipped the tent during the night. I told her no at first, then said, yeah. I had, because I saw it was open and zipped it back up. She looked at me funny, like maybe I was messing with her, but I wasn't. We stepped out of the tent to start making breakfast, and that's when we both stopped. Right in front of our tent, someone, or something, had taken the bundle of firewood we'd brought. Just a few sticks, maybe 8 or 10 pieces, in a mesh bag by the back tire, and arranged them in a perfect ring on the ground. Not stacked like for a fire. A flat, even ring. Every piece equidistant, maybe 3 feet across total, centered directly in front of our tent door. We hadn't touched the firewood. We hadn't planned on a fire. It hadn't been moved when we went to bed, I was sure of that, because I'd stepped over the bag on the way into the tent. The ground was sandy gravel. There weren't any boot prints or tire tracks, nothing around the ring either. Just the wood laid down like it had been measured out. We stood there for a while, not talking. It was bright out, fully daylight, but the silence felt wrong, like the whole place was holding its breath. Eventually, I walked around the perimeter of the camp. Nothing missing, nothing moved. Our cooler was untouched. Our packs were zipped. I looked for footprints or drag marks. Nothing. No animal sign either. The firewood itself was completely clean. No scratches, no soot, no bugs. Just dry sticks laid end to end in a circle. Not even a broken twig. I asked her again if she'd gotten up or heard anything. She hadn't. She's a light sleeper too. We both would have heard something approaching, but we didn't. After maybe 10 minutes of just standing there trying to figure it out, we packed up. No breakfast, no hike. We didn't talk much while tearing the tent down. Everything fit back into the 4Runner quick, and we got back to the road by 9 a.m. Later that afternoon, when we got back to town, I checked the firewood bag. It was empty. Not a single stick left inside. We never saw anyone else out there. No cars passed us on the way in or out. Nothing else ever came of it. Nothing followed us home. We never went back. It was around 10:30 at night, early March. Clear sky with a full moon. I remember that part because it was one of the only reasons I even went out. I don't usually jog that late, especially not alone, but I'd had a long day, my head was racing, and the weather was weirdly nice for the time of year. Cold but calm. No wind, no snow, dry pavement. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town in northern Colorado. Lots of space between houses, not much light pollution. There's a stretch of road about 1.5 miles long that loops through some open residential area, undeveloped lots, ranch-style homes, fields, that kind of thing. No sidewalks, just asphalt and a narrow shoulder. I started off, like I always do, headphones in, sleeves rolled up a bit, slow pace at first. There was nothing weird at the beginning. A couple porch lights were on, but no cars passed me and I didn't see anyone else out. Just my breathing and the occasional crunch of grit under my shoes. I think I made it about 3/4 of a mile before something felt off. I can't explain it exactly, but the air got heavy, almost. Like it had weight to it. Not hotter, not colder, just thicker. I took my earbuds out, thinking maybe it was some kind of pressure drop or something with the weather, but everything was still dead quiet. No dogs barking, no insects, no wind in the trees, just nothing. And then I got that feeling, the being watched one. Everyone's had it. But this was sharper, more specific, like I knew exactly where the gaze was coming from, directly above me. I stopped jogging and looked up, squinting because the moon was so bright. At first I didn't see anything, just the stars and that pale glow over everything. But then something moved. Not a light, not a streak. Just the absence of stars, a triangle of black, low and slow. It wasn't completely invisible. You know how when a plane passes in front of stars, it sort of distorts the sky for a second? This was like that, but there was no engine sound, no blinking lights, and it was moving too smoothly. Not hovering, not wobbling, just coasting. Maybe 2 or 3 stories above the street, directly overhead. I stepped backward without meaning to, just instinct. I didn't hear anything. Not even a breeze. but I swear I felt something, like a static charge. My arms broke out in goosebumps even though I hadn't been cold before. The object was a perfect triangle. Not a V shape like some stealth planes, more like an equilateral triangle with faint lines on the underside. I could only see them when it passed under the moonlight, not glowing or illuminated, just barely catching the light. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds. It wasn't going fast, maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour, but it didn't wobble or tilt or make a sound. Just kept going, and it was big. I don't know how to estimate size from below, but it was bigger than any small aircraft I've seen, maybe the size of a house. When it passed over the next row of trees and out of sight, I just stood there. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't running or screaming or anything. It felt more like my body didn't know what to do, like it didn't fit the list of threats I'm wired to react to. I stood still for maybe a full minute before I realized how quiet it still was. That was the worst part, honestly. The silence felt wrong. It didn't lift once the thing moved on. It just stayed. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt heavy and twitchy, like after you've been startled real bad. I kept looking up, but the sky was empty again. Stars, moon, the usual. When I got close to my house, I saw that my porch light had turned off. It's one of those motion sensor ones, and it's never off when I come back, especially if I've left the timer on, which I always do. I walked up the steps, waved my arm at the sensor. Nothing. I flipped the switch inside. Still nothing. That light didn't come back on until the next day, and I didn't do anything to fix it. I checked the bulb, the wiring, everything looked normal. It just started working again later like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept listening for weird sounds outside, humming, static, anything. But there was nothing, just my own house creaking and settling like usual. A couple days later, I tried jogging that same loop again. It was during the day this time. Everything looked normal. Same trees, same open fields, same houses. I even looked up where it had passed over me. Nothing in the branches. No signs of scorching or disturbance. But I've never gone back out jogging at night since, not even with a flashlight. Just can't make myself do it. I was out in the woods behind my cousin's place in early November, just north of Mendocino. I'd hunted that area a few times before, but only ever for small game. That year, I decided to try tracking a buck I'd spotted the weekend before. Big body, heavy antlers, always just on the edge of view. I hadn't gotten a clear shot, so I went back out early one morning before sunrise, hoping he'd make another appearance. It was colder than expected, even for that time of year. No wind, just quiet and still. I had my gear, rifle slung over my shoulder, flashlight clipped to my vest, though I rarely used it once my eyes adjusted. The moon was out, so visibility wasn't bad. I followed a set of prints about an hour in, just past the second ridgeline. They looked like deer tracks, spaced wide, angled toward a creek bed. I kept low, moved slow, stopped often. I'd done this enough times to know not to rush. About half a mile in, I noticed the woods had gone dead quiet. No birds, no rustling. Even the creek sounded muted, like it was further away than it should have been. That hit me weird. I paused and listened. Nothing but my own breath and the light crunch of frost under my boots. I followed the tracks another couple hundred yards, then stopped dead. There was a fresh impression in the dirt ahead of me, off the trail a little to the left. At first, I thought it was a fallen branch that had gotten swept into the leaves, but when I stepped closer, I saw the ground had been pressed in. 5 marks. Long, narrow, about the width of my fingers, but spaced way wider apart, like something had pushed down hard with 5 points, evenly spaced in a perfect arc. It looked almost like a handprint, but it was easily 2 feet across. No other prints around it, no drag marks, no signs of where it had come from or gone to. I crouched there for a long minute, staring at it. The soil was slightly damp, soft enough to hold a shape. Whatever made that print wasn't wearing boots or paws or hooves. It didn't fit anything I'd seen in that area, or anywhere really. I stood and backed up a step, and that's when I noticed something else. The deer tracks I'd been following just stopped about 10 feet before the print. Not faded or diverted. They just ended. No scatter, no sign of panic, just gone. I stayed there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe some kind of weird tree fall or maybe erosion had caused the shape. But the edges were too defined, clean lines, like pressure had been applied straight down, not dragged or swept. Eventually, I circled the area looking for more signs. I found 3 more prints like that, all spaced irregularly, like they were from something walking or moving, but each one the same size and shape. No other tracks between them, no crushed leaves, just those impressions in the dirt and silence. I felt strange being out there. Not scared exactly, but watched. It was that same feeling you get when someone's behind you, even if you know they're not. I kept checking over my shoulder, and I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I decided to head back. I marked the spot on my GPS, figured I could come back later, maybe bring someone else. I hadn't heard or seen a single animal since I found the first print. Even the bugs were gone. No buzzing, no movement. About halfway back to the truck, I started hearing this faint clicking sound, like stones tapping together, but fast and rhythmic. It wasn't constant, just came in short bursts every few minutes. I stopped and listened each time, but it never seemed closer or further. Just there, hanging in the air. It followed me the rest of the way out. Once I got to the clearing near the trailhead, everything snapped back at once. Birds started calling again. Wind in the trees, the normal background noise of the woods. It was like someone flipped a switch. The clicking stopped too. I didn't say anything to my cousin that day, just packed my gear and drove home. The next weekend, I went back. Brought a buddy with me, told him I'd seen a weird print and wanted another opinion. We hiked in the same way, followed my GPS back to the marked spot. The impressions were gone, not disturbed or trampled, just gone. The ground looked untouched. Even the leaves were back where they'd been, like no one had stepped there at all. The deer tracks weren't there either. Nothing. My buddy thought I'd marked the wrong place. I know I didn't. We stayed for a few hours, never heard the clicking again, but the quiet came back around midday. Just this sudden, unnatural stillness. My buddy noticed it too. Asked if there was a storm rolling in. The sky was clear. We left not long after that. I haven't been back out there since. Not to that ridge. I've hunted the lower trails, stuck closer to the roads, but I don't go past the creek anymore. Sometimes when I'm up there alone, I still hear that clicking. Never close, never loud, just enough to know it's there. I was working the overnight shift at WZLA, a local AM station out of central Indiana. Not a big operation, just me in the booth, a wall of half-busted gear, and a few regulars who called in during the witching hours. I liked it, honestly. Quiet work, a lot of freedom. I could play what I wanted as long as I stuck to the loose format and hit the top of the hour IDs. Nobody really cared what I did between midnight and 6 a.m. This happened in October 2 years ago. I remember because it was the week after we stopped running baseball recaps and switched to full music blocks overnight. That night was dead quiet. Weather was dry, sky was clear, no storms on the radar, no tech issues earlier in the evening. I'd been playing a mix of old soul and ambient stuff, trying out a slower, weirder vibe. At exactly 2:13 a.m., everything cut out. No pop, no hiss, just nothing. All the boards went dark. The room lights stayed on, so I knew it wasn't a full power outage, but everything audio-related was dead. The on-air light above the door snapped off. My monitors went black. Even the little red clock we synced with the national feed froze. I thought maybe the breaker tripped, but I checked the panel and everything looked fine. Then I noticed my phone had stopped playing the stream too. Usually I leave it running just to make sure the delay's working. But now it was frozen mid-track. The weirdest part was how quiet it got. I mean, yeah, I work in a radio booth, but there's always something humming, amps, fans, that little whine from the rack room. But for those few minutes, it was like someone stuffed the whole station in cotton. I checked my watch. Digital, nothing fancy. It was working fine. It said 2:14. I waited a few seconds, then tried the soundboard again. Nothing. Then, at exactly 2:17, everything flicked back on. Just like that, the on-air light buzzed to life. Monitors lit up, audio meters started jumping. The red LED clock jumped from 2:13 to 2:17 without ticking the seconds in between. That was strange, sure, but it got weirder. The board was running, but not from my playlist. I use a laptop plugged into the auxiliary input. I'd paused it when everything cut out. It was still paused, my hands hadn't touched it, but something else was going out live. The channel labeled Mic 2 was active. I never used Mic 2. It's one of the old XLR jacks by a side console, not connected to any of the computers. It's meant for interviews we never do. But there it was. Green bar jumping, levels rising and falling like it was picking something up. I put on headphones and routed the feed through. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was feedback. There was a low pulse, steady and slow, like a heartbeat being played through a subwoofer. Every couple seconds, a soft thump. Underneath it was static, not white noise exactly, but hissy and layered, like someone flipping through AM channels really fast. And in that static, there were voices. Not clear speech, not enough to understand, but definitely voices, whispering, overlapping, like a crowd murmuring just behind a wall. I tried turning it down, but it stayed the same volume. Even when I dropped the fader to 0, it kept coming through. I looked around the room like someone might be messing with me, but I was alone. I checked Mic 2. There was nothing plugged into it, just the cable dangling under the board. I unplugged it completely. The feed kept going. That didn't make sense. The board was showing a signal, but it wasn't coming from any input I could trace. It was just there. I hit record on the software, just in case. Let it run while I tried to figure out what the hell was happening. The pulse never sped up or slowed down. The whispers changed a little. Some words popped through, but they weren't in English. Or if they were distorted past recognition. The whole thing lasted about 7 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Not faded, stopped. Dead air. The channel cut out on its own. The meters dropped to 0. I sat there for a long time, just listening to the silence. I played some music after that. Didn't say anything on air. Just queued up a long track and walked outside for a smoke. My hands were shaking a little. It wasn't fear exactly, but something about what I'd heard didn't sit right. It felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be picked up. When the shift ended at 6, I pulled the recording. It saved fine. The file was just over 7 minutes. I listened to it in my car before heading home, and it sounded the same. Pulse, static, whispers. But when I played it again later that afternoon on a different system, it was blank. Just dead air. Same file, no sound. I tried different programs, re-exported it, even ran it through a spectrum analyzer. Nothing showed. It was like the sound was only there when I heard it live. The waveform showed activity, spikes where the pulse hit, but the playback was silent. I didn't mention it to the station manager. Didn't see the point. The gear was working again, nothing was damaged. And I figured if I tried to explain it, I'd just sound tired or crazy. A few nights later, I checked the security logs. The system we use tracks input channels and time codes for legal reasons. According to the logs, between 2:13 and 2:17, the station broadcasted dead air. No active inputs, nothing on the board. But I know what I heard. I kept working there for another year before switching to a different job. Never had anything else like that happen. Not exactly. But sometimes late at night when the signal cuts weird or the static flares up for no reason, I still think about it. Especially if it happens right around 2:13. I was driving west on Route 43 through a stretch of farmland I didn't know too well. It was around 1 in the morning. I remember that because I checked the clock, thinking I'd stop for gas soon. I was coming back from visiting my cousin in Kentucky, trying to make it back to Terre Haute by sunrise. I'd been through a few small towns earlier, but this one wasn't on my map app. No name popped up when I drove in. No welcome sign either. Just a couple old street lamps and a hand-painted gas price board outside a shuttered station. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Some of the storefronts were boarded up, some weren't. A church steeple in the distance. Rows of narrow houses lined both sides of the main street, most of them dark, except for these dim porch bulbs flickering now and then. At first, I thought the flickering was just old wiring. Country houses sometimes have weird voltage issues, but then I realized all of them were doing it. Every house on the street, perfectly synchronized. On for about 3 seconds, then a quick flicker, then off. Wait 5 seconds, then on again. Same rhythm every time. I slowed down. Something about it was off, but I couldn't explain why. It wasn't just porch lights, kitchen windows, living room lamps, even the street lights above me, all blinking together like they were hooked to one circuit. I figured maybe the grid was acting up. Maybe a power station nearby was cycling weird. I thought about stopping and taking a video, but I didn't want to pull over yet. The place felt too still. No cars parked on the road, no movement in any of the houses, no dogs barking, just me and the sound of my tires on cracked pavement. Then I noticed the sky. I couldn't tell you exactly when it caught my eye. I'd been staring ahead, kind of spacing out. But at one point I looked up through my windshield and something about the stars seemed wrong. There was this patch of sky just above the middle of town that didn't look right. It wasn't a color or a light. It was more like an absence, like a section of stars had gone missing. The way clouds blot out the sky, except there were no clouds. The air was perfectly clear. I pulled over by a diner with all the chairs stacked on the tables, shut off my engine. The flickering lights continued on, flicker off, like clockwork. I got out of the car. That's when I realized the thing in the sky wasn't just a dark patch. It had edges. Not sharp ones, but definite lines, too straight to be natural. It was huge, took up maybe a third of the visible sky above town. No lights on it, no movement, just this massive shape blocking out part of the stars, and it was silent. Completely, totally silent. I tried to listen for power lines, crickets, anything, but there was nothing. Just that quiet flicker of lights. My ears started ringing a little, not loud, just like when you're in a really quiet room and you realize your own head's making noise. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon. The thing wasn't moving. It wasn't tilting or wobbling or pulsing. It just sat there, high above the town, so big I couldn't see the whole thing at once. I thought about waking someone up, knocking on a door, but none of the houses looked like they had anyone in them. No TVs flickering inside, no shadows, no cars in driveways, just those dumb lights blinking together. I checked my phone to take a picture. The camera opened, but the image was black. I pointed it at the diner, black. Pointed it at my car, black. I switched to video, same thing, black screen. But my home screen worked fine. Battery was at 42%, signal bar was gone. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. I didn't want to stay, but I didn't want to drive under that thing either. It was just hovering. I had no idea how high up it was. Could have been 500 feet, could have been a mile. There were no points of reference. I opened the car door and sat back in the driver's seat with the door open. I didn't start the engine yet. I just watched the lights. 5 seconds off, 3 seconds on, 1 flicker, repeat. At some point, I realized the car's clock hadn't changed. It still said 1:06, even though it had definitely been longer than that. I'd been standing outside for at least 10 minutes. I started the car. The radio crackled. Loud static, like a blown speaker. I turned it off. The dash lights flickered once, then came back on. Clock jumped to 1:24. I didn't like that. I pulled out of the diner lot and kept driving west. As I got near the edge of town, the lights started to fall out of sync. Just slightly, like a few bulbs were hesitating. By the time I passed the last row of houses, they were flickering randomly again. Normal. A second later, I looked in my rearview mirror. The thing was gone. The stars were back. All of them. No dark patch. The houses were still behind me, some lights on, most off. Just like any other back road town at night. I didn't stop again until I hit a highway 20 miles out. I didn't look at the sky anymore. Didn't listen to the radio. I just drove. The next day, I tried to find the town again. Looked up every road I'd taken, traced the route on Google Maps. Nothing matched. There were a couple towns along that stretch of 43, but none of them looked like what I saw. No diner with checkerboard windows, no church with a metal cross like the one I passed. Sometimes if I can't sleep, I'll pull up satellite view and scan the area, just trying to match the layout. I never find it. I'm not even sure I could draw it anymore. I remember what it felt like though, like something was watching, not in a threatening way, just observing. Still, waiting. Like it didn't need to move because it already knew I'd leave. I was out on the lake before dawn, just me and the fog thick enough to taste. I'd gotten up early to fish before the heat set in, hoping to catch some bass while the water was still calm. The air was cold, sticky with moisture, and the boat felt heavier than usual, like it was sinking into something I couldn't see. I set up near my usual spot, a little cove where the trees crowd close and the water stays deep. I turned on the sonar just to check the depth before dropping the line. It showed the usual readings, around 20 feet, nothing out of the ordinary. That's when I heard it, a low hum, almost like a distant engine idling underwater. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like something pulsing beneath the surface right below me. I stopped moving, the boat still, and the hum seemed to grow just a little louder. I checked the sonar again. Nothing changed. No fish, no debris, no signs of anything except empty water. I glanced over the side, but the fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet down. The water looked black and still, no ripples or bubbles. The hum kept going, slow and steady, like a drone holding a note. I figured maybe it was a motor from a distant boat, but I couldn't hear anything else. No waves, no other noises on the lake, just that hum. It was coming from right below the boat, though, not out on the water. I tried to move the boat, paddling slowly toward shore, but the hum didn't change. It stayed right under me, almost like it was following. The sonar still showed nothing. After a while, I pulled my phone out to check the time. The screen blinked, then the battery dropped from 82% to 15% in a second. Weird, but I figured the cold was messing with it. I looked back at the water, and the hum shifted. It got softer, then stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet. The fog pressed in around me, thick and unmoving. Then, out of nowhere, the water below the boat started to glow. Not bright, just this faint blue-green light, like some kind of deep-sea creature shining in the dark. It spread in a perfect circle beneath the hull, about 10 feet across, glowing steadily for maybe 30 seconds. I blinked, and the glow vanished. The hum never came back. I wasn't sure what to think. I'd spent years on that lake and never seen anything like it. I paddled back to the dock slower than usual, eyes scanning the fog like I was expecting something to rise up out of it. When I got home, I checked the sonar app logs. It showed a blank line during that time, like the sensor was off or not working. But my boat was on the water the whole time. I tried telling a few buddies, but they just laughed it off. Said maybe I imagined it, or some weird electrical glitch. I don't know what it was. I'm not even sure if I want to know. But every time I go back out there, that spot feels different, like it's waiting for something. It happened about 4 years ago, mid-October. I was driving back from my brother's place outside of Jackson. He'd invited me over to help fix a busted fence post on his property, and we ended up having a couple beers after. I wasn't drunk or anything, 2 bottles over the course of 3 hours, just tired. I left around 10:30, figured I'd be home by a little after midnight. It's about a 90-minute drive, mostly back roads. I took Route 43, the same way I always do. That stretch between Pine Hollow and Lakewood gets real quiet at night. It's all woods and farmland, and you can go 10, 15 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. There's one gas station halfway, but it's usually closed by 9. I had the radio on low, just enough to fill the silence. I remember checking the time at 11:47. I know that exactly because the song playing was Wicked Game, and I thought it was weird to hear that so late on a rock station. Right after that, I came around this long bend just past mile marker 214, the one where the shoulder drops off into a ditch. I know that bend well. That's where it happened. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like I was gaining altitude too fast. Not painful, just sudden. Then they popped, like when you're in a plane. At the exact same moment, every hair on my arm stood up. No exaggeration. Full goosebumps, both arms, back of my neck. I blinked, and it was like the road jumped. Not in a jolt or anything. I didn't swerve. I didn't feel the car lurch or lose traction. It just shifted. The bend was gone. I was suddenly on a straightaway about 4 or 5 miles down from where I'd just been. I know that part of the road, too. There's this crooked mailbox with reflectors on the left and a busted wooden fence on the right. I recognized both immediately. That alone would have been enough to freak me out. But then I glanced at the clock on my dash. It said 12:04. 17 minutes had passed. Just gone. I slowed down, pulled onto the shoulder, put it in park. I sat there with the engine idling, just staring at the clock like maybe it would correct itself. It didn't. I reached for my phone to double check. and it matched. 12:04, now 12:05. I hadn't zoned out. I didn't fall asleep at the wheel. I was fully awake, hands at 10 and 2. I remembered the bend, the song, the pressure in my ears, and then I was somewhere else, with no memory of the drive in between. I checked my gas gauge. The needle had dropped slightly, like I had been driving normally. Not idling, not stopped, like the car had kept moving the whole time. I got out and looked around with my flashlight. There weren't any skid marks or signs I'd hit something. No animals, no debris, just a quiet, dark road and a couple of bugs hitting my windshield. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a good 15 minutes before going inside. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't feel sick or disoriented, just rattled. I kept thinking I'd remember something if I gave it enough time, like maybe I'd blanked from fatigue. But I never got anything back. Just that 1 second I was coming out of the curve, and the next I was miles down the road. The next morning, I checked the mileage on my car. It lined up. I hadn't skipped distance, just time. I told myself maybe I'd misread the clock before, but I know I didn't. I remember thinking how weird it was that they were playing Chris Isaak right before midnight. That's not something I would have imagined. For a couple days after, I kept thinking about the pressure in my ears. It wasn't subtle. It was like something shifted in the air around me. I even Googled stuff about barometric pressure changes and freak weather events, but nothing lined up with that part of the state that night. A few nights later, I went back out to that stretch around the same time. I don't know what I was hoping for, maybe to feel something similar or prove to myself it was nothing. I drove slow, windows cracked, radio off. Nothing happened. No ear pressure, no missing time. Just the same empty road and my headlights catching bits of gravel and roadside weeds. But when I passed that same stretch near mile marker 214, I noticed something off. There was a spot on the right shoulder where the gravel looked different. Not fresh exactly, but disturbed, like someone had raked it. A smooth, even pattern that didn't match the rest of the road. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a 6-foot wide patch that looked wiped. I didn't stop, I just kept going. The last thing, and this might mean nothing, is that ever since that night, my dash clock's been off. Just a few seconds behind my phone at first, but it drifts more every week. I've reset it 3 times. It won't stay synced. I don't know what that means. Maybe nothing, but it didn't do that before. It was just past 9 when my daughter came running in from the porch. We'd already eaten dinner, and my wife was doing dishes while I flipped through channels. Liv was 13 then, old enough to know when something was off, but still young enough to get worked up over nothing sometimes. I figured it was just deer in the field or a plane overhead, but she didn't sound like she was messing around. She kept saying, come look," and pulling at my arm. So I got up, walked out to the porch with her, and the second I stepped outside, I knew it wasn't deer. It was quiet, not just country quiet, not frogs, not bugs, not wind in the corn, just nothing. That's the first thing I noticed. Then I saw the light. Out over the south end of the cornfield, maybe 100 yards from the house, there was something floating. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't a drone, it wasn't a plane or a helicopter, just a pale round light. Not bright like a spotlight, more like the color of a full moon. Hazy around the edges. It hovered maybe 30 feet above the field. No sound, no movement, just there. My wife came out next, drying her hands on a dish towel. She stopped in the doorway when she saw it. None of us said anything for a while. It didn't blink or change color, just sat there in the air, maybe the size of a basketball from where we stood. I kept waiting for some kind of shape to reveal itself. A fuselage, wings, rotors, anything. But there wasn't anything there except the light. We stayed on the porch for probably 5 minutes. The dogs were inside, and he noticed they weren't barking. In fact, they were lying down by the laundry room door, not asleep, just still. That was weird too. After a while, the light drifted, not fast, just smooth, maybe 10 or 15 feet to the east. Then it stopped again. No wobble, no sound. I walked down the steps into the yard without thinking, just trying to get a better angle. It didn't react. I went maybe halfway across the yard before my wife said my name. Not loud, just enough to snap me out of it. I stopped and looked back. She looked scared. When I turned around again, the light was gone. No sound, no flash, just not there anymore. I stared at the sky for a few seconds, thinking maybe it had shot upward, but I didn't see anything. No trail, no movement, just empty dark. We didn't say much that night. My wife told Liv not to talk about it at school. I agreed. Not because I didn't believe what we saw, but because I didn't want anyone treating her like she was crazy. We didn't call the sheriff. Didn't take photos. Didn't know what we'd even say. Next morning, I went out to the field before breakfast. I figured if anything landed or shined a beam or whatever, it might have left marks. I didn't expect to find anything. I was wrong. Right under where that thing had hovered. Not a huge area, maybe a 30-foot circle. Every single corn stalk was twisted. All still standing, none broken or flattened. But each one had been turned clockwise at the base. Like something had gripped them all and spun them a quarter turn. The dirt around them was undisturbed. No tire tracks, no footprints. Just this one section where every plant had been rotated. It didn't even look obvious unless you stood still and looked for the curve in the rows. But once you noticed it, it was plain as day. I crouched down and tried turning one back. It didn't move easily. It took some effort. The stalks weren't young and soft. These were late season, dry, and tough. Whatever did that wasn't gentle. The edges of the circle were sharp, no fade out. Just normal field, then twisted stalks, then normal again. I walked the perimeter twice. No smell, no scorched earth, nothing else weird. That afternoon, I drove into town and talked to a friend of mine who works the co-op. Asked, casual-like, if there was any kind of fungus or wind shear or pest that could twist plants at the root. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head, said if wind did it, you'd see flattening or bending at the top. And fungus doesn't do clean circles. I didn't press him. We kept it quiet. Even Liv didn't mention it again. But for the next couple nights, I noticed things. Our motion sensor light on the shed clicked on twice, even though nothing was there. One night around 3 a.m., the dogs both started whining at the same time, but didn't bark. Just stared at the back door and whined. I got up, turned on the porch light, stepped outside. Nothing. No animals, no cars, no sound. Same dead quiet as that first night. A few weeks later, the corn dried out enough to harvest. I went over that patch carefully. Most of the twisted stalks had stayed upright, but their yield was lower, almost like the ears didn't develop fully. Some had tiny kernels, others were shriveled. Outside the circle, everything was fine. That winter, I turned the soil and planted rye like I always do. By spring, the ground looked normal again. But every now and then, when the sky's real clear and I'm out late locking up the barn, I still find myself looking out at that spot. Not for long, just enough to check. It started about 40 minutes after takeoff, somewhere over the Utah-Nevada border. I was flying solo, ferrying a small twin-engine from Salt Lake to Bakersfield. The sun had just dipped behind the mountains, and I was cruising around 9,000 feet. Clear skies, smooth air. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'd done this route maybe a dozen times. Easy run. Quiet, a little boring even. I had the autopilot on, and I remember thumbing through frequencies, half listening to some chatter from a flight further south. I saw the thing off the left wingtip. At first, I thought it was just another plane in the distance, maybe a medevac or something off course. It was just a dark shape, no lights, no strobes, nothing blinking. Just this fixed point, moving with me. I watched it for a minute, figuring it'd either peel off or I'd get a call from ATC to adjust for traffic. But the call never came. I checked my radar. Nothing there. Not even a blip. I leaned a little toward the side window. Whatever it was about level with me. Same altitude, same speed, just pacing along perfectly. It wasn't close enough to be dangerous, maybe 200 or 300 yards out, but it wasn't gaining or falling back either. Just sitting there. It was hard to make out any shape. The way the light was fading made it look more like a hole in the sky than an object. Not reflecting anything, just this silhouette, darker than the sky behind it. I toggled the transponder. No response. Still no radar contact. I considered calling it in, but I hesitated. I didn't want to sound jumpy. There was nothing aggressive about it. It wasn't weaving or closing in. It just stayed exactly where it was. Then I noticed something that got under my skin. No matter how I adjusted heading or speed, Even by small margins, the distance stayed the same. I slowed down 5 knots. So did it. I brought it back up. It matched, like it was tethered. I tilted the plane a few degrees to the right, watched to see if the object would shift. It did. Stayed in the same relative position. No turbulence, no pressure changes, just smooth air and that thing hanging out beside me like it belonged there. After about 5 minutes of this, I tried to get a better look. I switched off autopilot and gently turned left, easing into a bank that would bring me toward it. The second my nose started to pivot in its direction, it vanished. Not accelerated away, not dropped altitude, just gone. One frame it was there, the next it wasn't. I leveled out, scanned everywhere, nothing. Checked radar again, still clear. I tried raising ATC just to ask about nearby traffic, kept it vague. They said no known aircraft in my vicinity. The rest of the flight was normal, uneventful. But here's the part I can't explain. After I landed in Bakersfield and taxied in, I started logging the flight data. My GPS track was clean, but there was a 10-minute span over central Nevada where the flight path line dipped, just slightly, like the plane had drifted down maybe 50 feet and then corrected. I never touched the yoke during that time. Autopilot was engaged the whole stretch. There was no change in pitch, no turbulence, nothing I would have felt. But the altitude data shows this soft, slow dip, then a gentle climb back up, like something had drawn the plane lower without me noticing. I checked the barometric readings. No anomaly. That dark shape never reappeared. Not on the way back. Not on any other run since. I still don't know what I was looking at. It wasn't a drone, too big, and no lights. It wasn't another plane. No heat signature, no transponder, no warning. Just me, alone in the air with something that shouldn't have been able to do what it did. I was out in the backfield one afternoon putting in new fence posts. The old fence had seen better days. Posts rotted, wire sagging, and after the winter storms, a few sections had just fallen apart. I figured a weekend of work and I'd have it all fixed up again. I'd started early, and by mid-afternoon, I'd cleared the overgrown brush and pulled out the worst of the old posts. I was getting ready to dig holes for the new ones when I noticed something that made me stop. The old posts that were still standing, they weren't just leaning or broken like I expected. They were bent outward, away from the center of this patch of the field, in a near-perfect arc. At first I thought maybe a big animal had knocked them down or something, but the bend was too smooth, too consistent. The curve was like someone had pushed them out from inside all at once. The circle the posts formed was about 25 to 30 feet across. The ground inside was just grass, nothing unusual. No footprints, no disturbed earth. I scratched my head and walked around trying to figure out what had caused it. There was no sign of a storm or flood damage there, and the rest of the field looked untouched. I figured I must have missed something the last time I looked at this fence, but I'd been out here just a few weeks earlier, and the posts had been standing straight, even if a little weathered. I walked the perimeter of the circle slowly. The posts curved outward like a dome had pushed against them from inside, but I couldn't find anything inside the ring. No holes, no weird markings, just that strange bending. It felt off, like the field had shifted, but only in that exact spot. I told my wife about it that evening, but she just said maybe it was old machinery or some kind of farming equipment I'd forgotten about. I thought about that, but the bend was too smooth and all the same direction. Machines tend to smash or break things unevenly, not bend everything like a bow. The next morning, I came back out to the circle early just to look at it in daylight. The air was still cool and the field smelled like wet earth and grass. When I got there, the posts looked the same, but the light made the bending more obvious. The wood was splintered in places, but there was no fresh damage, just old, weathered cracks. As I stood there, I started hearing this low hum. It wasn't loud, more like a vibration under the ground. I figured it was a tractor or some kind of machinery from a neighbor's farm, so I looked around. The nearest farm was a good distance away, and I couldn't see or hear anything moving. The hum faded after a few seconds. I went to the circle again the following night, just after sunset. I don't know why. I guess I wanted to see if the circle looked different in the dark or if anything else was going on. I brought a flashlight, but I didn't really expect to find anything. That night, the posts looked darker, the bends casting long shadows in the beam from my flashlight. I felt kind of exposed out there, but the field was quiet. Then something caught my eye. A faint glow coming from inside the circle, just beyond the bent posts. It wasn't bright, more like a soft, pale light hovering just above the grass. I froze and watched for a minute. The glow stayed in one spot, flickering slightly, but didn't grow or move toward me. It didn't seem like any kind of fire or flashlight, just light. I didn't hear any sounds from it, just that same low hum I'd heard before. I wanted to call out or get closer, but something made me hold back. I kept my distance, shining my flashlight around the circle, but there was nothing else there. Then the light disappeared slowly, like someone turned it off. I left the field that night with an uneasy feeling I can't really explain. When I got home, I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, but my battery was down more than I remembered. It felt like the signal was weaker than usual, too. The next day, I talked to a couple of neighbors, but no one else had seen or heard anything strange out by the fence. One of them mentioned how the weather had been weird lately, some days hotter than expected, others foggy in the morning, but no real storms or anything that could explain the bent posts. Over the next week, I kept going back to that spot at different times of day. Sometimes I'd hear the hum, sometimes I'd see the faint glow, but it was never consistent. No one else seemed to notice anything, and I started wondering if I was imagining it. One afternoon, while I was repairing a broken section of fence near the circle, I caught the scent of something strange in the air. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before. Metallic, but not sharp, kind of sweet and faint, like burnt plastic mixed with something earthy. I looked around, but couldn't find a source. The smell lingered just for a moment and then vanished. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept hearing small creaks from outside, like wood flexing or settling, but nothing that made sense, given how calm the night was. I got up a few times and checked the window facing the field. The moonlight made the bent posts look like shadows reaching out. At one point, I thought I saw a shape moving inside the circle, a quick flicker of something just beyond the tree line. When I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, it was gone. No footprints in the grass, nothing disturbed. A few days later, I noticed that one of the posts on the edge of the circle had shifted a little more. It was bent farther out than before. I didn't touch it. It just felt like whatever had bent those posts was still active somehow. That night, I left a camera set up, pointed at the circle. The next morning, I checked the footage. For hours, nothing happened, but right at 2:58 a.m., the camera picked up a faint glow near the center of the circle. It hovered and pulsed gently, then vanished at 3:05 a.m. I rewound the footage again and again. There was no sound on the recording, just the glow. The camera's internal clock matched the real time perfectly. I told a few friends who work in agriculture or land management, but no one could explain it. Some said it might be the effect of underground gas or something natural, but I doubted it. Nothing about that glow or the bends felt natural. One night, about 2 weeks after I first found the bent posts, I went out again with a flashlight. It was late, probably around midnight. As I walked into the circle, the air seemed heavier, thicker. I swear I could feel eyes on me, like something was watching from just beyond sight. The hum started again, low and steady, and the faint glow appeared near the center of the ring. I stood still, trying to make sense of it, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. I pulled out my phone to take a picture. The screen flickered and went black. I tried turning it back on, but it wouldn't respond. I put it away and looked up. The glow was gone. I left the field quickly that night, but on the way back to the house, I thought I heard something moving in the bushes beside the road. I stopped and listened. Nothing. Since then, the circle hasn't changed much. The posts stay bent in that same arc, and the glow and hum come and go without pattern. I haven't touched the old fence anymore. Part of me wants to rip it all out and start fresh, but another part doesn't want to disturb it. I don't know what's happening out there. It doesn't seem dangerous, but it feels wrong. Like there's something just beneath the surface of the field, something watching and waiting. I'm still working around it, fixing what I can, but every time I'm near that circle, I feel uneasy, like I'm not alone. Whatever it is, it's there, silent, still, and somehow more than just a bent fence. The fire started on a Tuesday, just after noon. We were on the outskirts of a national forest, the kind of place where the trees get tall and thick enough that you can't see the sky most of the time. I was part of a small wildfire crew, just 6 of us, sent out from the nearest station to help contain this blaze before it spread to the bigger towns. It was the kind of work where you get used to being covered in soot and sweat and the smell of smoke hanging in the air all day. We'd been on the fire line for maybe 4 hours, hiking in and setting up hoses and digging fire breaks. The wind was shifting a bit, which made everyone nervous. It wasn't a huge fire, but in that kind of dry forest, it could get out of hand fast. We were working near a ridge, and the smoke was thick enough that it blocked out the sun. Everything looked orange and hazy, like a permanent dusk. Around 7 p.m., just as the sky was starting to darken, someone on the crew, Jesse, I think, called out that there was a light in the smoke above the ridge. At first, I thought it was one of the helicopters or planes that come to drop water or retardant. But the helicopters had stopped flying hours earlier, and this wasn't a blinking light or a searchlight. The light was bright, white, and steady. It looked like a giant flashlight beam, but it wasn't cutting through the smoke in a cone like a spotlight would. Instead, it was just a glowing orb, maybe 10 feet across, hanging in the middle of the thick smoke a few hundred yards away. It moved slowly, descending from higher up the ridge and then stopping in place. No one spoke for a second. We all just stared. The smoke around the light twisted and curled like it was reacting to the glow, but the fire itself kept burning around the edges. We tried to figure out what it was. Jesse swore it wasn't a drone or anything from the Forest Service, but none of us knew what else to think. The light stayed there for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, just hovering without moving. It didn't pulse or flicker. It was almost unnervingly calm given the chaos of the fire around it. Then, after those minutes passed, it started to rise again, slowly at first, then faster, until it vanished into the thick smoke above the ridge. That's when the weirdest thing happened. We noticed that the fire below, in a nearly perfect circle around where the light had hovered, was completely out. The ring was about 50 feet across, and inside it the forest looked untouched by the fire. No burnt leaves, no blackened trees, nothing. Just a clean, crisp line separating the burned ground from the unburned. We checked it over and over, poking at the edges, expecting it to smolder or flare back up. But nothing. The fire had stopped dead. Like someone had drawn an invisible boundary it wasn't allowed to cross. We radioed back to base to report it, but the static was thick and garbled, like the radio was having trouble getting through. When someone finally answered, they told us to hold position and wait for the night crew to arrive. We set up camp near the edge of that ring, still looking out at the glowing orange sky and the dense smoke. The crew was quiet, more serious than usual. Nobody really joked or tried to explain what we'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that low hum under the crackling of the fire, almost like a distant engine idling somewhere. But there was nothing else out there except us and the forest. In the early morning hours, I got up and walked over to the fire ring again. The air inside it was cooler, and the smell of smoke was faint, almost like the fire had never been there. I noticed something else then. The trees just inside the ring looked different. They weren't burnt, but they also weren't quite normal. The bark was smoother, and the leaves had a slightly darker green than the rest of the forest. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I told the crew, but no one else seemed to notice. Maybe they were too tired or just wanted to move on. The rest of the day went by slowly. The fire crews that arrived later started reinforcing the fire breaks, but the fire didn't cross that circle at all. We spent hours making sure the line held. When we finally left, the smoke had cleared a bit. I looked back one last time at that perfect circle. It stood out, stark and strange, against the rest of the blackened forest. Since then, I've checked satellite images and fire reports from that day, but no one else seems to have noticed the ring or the light. The official story is just a normal wildfire not contained by good work and weather changes. I'm not so sure. Sometimes when I'm outside at night, I swear I hear a faint hum far off in the distance, like a machine running quietly just beyond the trees. And every now and then, I catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows at the edge of the forest. Not a person, not an animal, but something else, watching. I don't know what it was that night, but whatever it was, it didn't want that fire to burn through its territory. I left that forest behind, but that perfect circle stayed with me. I was night fishing off the coast, maybe a mile or so out from the inlet. It wasn't unusual for me. I've done it for years, sometimes solo, sometimes with my cousin. That night, I was alone. Calm water, no wind, stars just barely visible through a thin cloud layer. The kind of quiet where the only sounds are the creak of the boat and the occasional plunk of water against the sides. I dropped anchor around 10:30 p.m., figured I'd do some bottom fishing for a few hours before heading in. I had a small lantern hanging off the back rail and a headlamp strapped over my hat. No other boats in sight, just dark water all around and the faint glow of the shoreline way off behind me. I cast out and waited. I wasn't catching much, but I didn't care. I liked the quiet. Around midnight, I heard this tapping sound. It wasn't the usual kind of creak or bump you get from waves or the anchor line. It was slow and steady, like someone lightly knocking on the hull. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 more. Not loud, but clear. I stood up and swung my light around, thinking maybe some driftwood had bumped up against me. There was nothing, just black water in every direction. I leaned over the side, shined my headlamp down into the water. It only lit up a few feet, but there was no debris, no fish breaking the surface, no birds. I figured maybe it was the current playing tricks or something brushing underneath that I couldn't see. Then it happened again. 3 taps, pause, 3 more. I walked to the other side of the boat, but the sound didn't follow. It stayed near the rear by the stern, close to where the lantern was hanging. I knelt down and leaned over, listening. The tapping stopped for a few minutes. Just as I was about to stand up, it came back, this time right below where I was crouching. 3 slow taps, then nothing. I pulled the lantern up, thinking maybe it was attracting fish or something, but as soon as I did, I felt this weird sensation, like the air changed. Not colder exactly, just denser, heavier. I could hear my own breathing in my ears, and everything around me seemed quieter than before. No bugs, no birds from the shore. Even the water seemed to stop moving. I stood there holding the lantern and staring into the water for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing moved. Then the boat shifted slightly, like something brushed against it from underneath. That's when I got the first real spike of unease. I've had sharks bump the boat before, even dolphins, but this was different. It wasn't a hit or a jolt, just a slow, almost deliberate push, like someone placing their hand on the hull and dragging it. I turned off the lantern to see better out into the dark, thinking maybe the reflection was messing with my night vision. When I did, it was like someone had thrown a blanket over the world. I couldn't see anything. No stars, no horizon, not even the outline of the water. Then I heard it again. 3 taps, same rhythm. I turned the lantern back on and scanned the water with it, moving slowly in all directions. Still nothing. I dropped the light down on a rope and lowered it toward the surface, hoping to get a better view below. That's when I noticed the surface of the water wasn't reflecting properly. It looked dull, not rippling like normal, almost like glass with something behind it, warping the light slightly. I reached down and dipped my hand in, half expecting it to be colder or thicker or something, but it felt normal, just regular seawater. I pulled my hand out and waited. Then I saw the light flicker, not from the lantern, from below it, like something passed between the light and the bottom of the boat. It was fast, just a ripple in the glow, like something large had glided past beneath the surface. That's when I hauled the lantern up quick and reeled in my line. I didn't care if I left the bait or the rig, I just didn't want it hanging overboard anymore. I started the engine. It coughed once, then died. Tried again. Nothing. Third time, it sputtered for a second, then cut out completely. I checked the fuel line, a back spark plug, kill switch. Everything looked fine. No reason it shouldn't start. I keep a backup battery-powered radio for weather reports and emergencies. Pulled it out, turned it on. Just static. I checked the antenna, switched channels. nothing but hissing white noise. It felt like something was messing with everything electronic. Even my headlamp started dimming, though the batteries were fresh. I sat in the captain's chair and waited. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe for something to break the surface or for the fog to roll in. I didn't know. Then the tapping started again. This time, slower. One tap, pause, two taps, pause, one more. It felt like it was trying to communicate something, though I couldn't make sense of it. I stayed frozen in the chair for a long time. I didn't look over the edge again. I didn't touch anything. I just sat there, listening. Eventually, I realized the air had gone back to normal. The pressure in my head eased up, and I could hear the distant hum of crickets from shore again. I tried the engine one more time. It started on the first turn. The radio clicked on too, just as suddenly, mid-broadcast, like nothing had happened. I didn't waste time. Pulled the anchor, turned toward the inlet, and headed in as fast as the boat would go without risking anything. When I got back to the dock, I tied off and checked the hull with my flashlight. No scratches, no dents, nothing unusual. But I noticed the lantern, the one I'd pulled up before, had gone completely dead. Batteries were fine. Bulb wasn't burned out. It just wouldn't turn on again. I left it on the workbench in my garage. A few days later, I checked it again, and it worked like normal. I haven't gone out solo at night since then. I've been back out on the water plenty of times, even near the same spot, but only during the day. And I've never heard that tapping again. It was in July, maybe 5 years ago. I was out on the water with my cousin Gabe and two of his buddies, Ricky and Dan. We'd taken Gabe's dad's boat, a 24-foot center console, out from a little marina in Rhode Island. Not for fishing or anything, just a night ride. The water was calm and the sky was clear. No moon, just stars. It was one of those nights where you could see the Milky Way if you looked hard enough. We were maybe 12, 13 miles offshore. Far enough that the coastline was just a faint glow behind us. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Like no wind, no other boats, no engines since we'd cut it maybe 10 minutes earlier just to drift and hang out. I was sitting up near the bow, half dozing, when Gabe said something. "What the hell is that?" He was standing near the stern, squinting out past the starboard side. We all turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. Then Ricky pointed. About 100 yards out, the surface of the water looked wrong. It wasn't a splash or a wave or anything, more like something was pushing up from underneath, slow and smooth. No sound, just this faint rise in the water, like a dome breaking the surface. Then we saw the light. It was dull, like a dim bulb behind frosted glass. Not flashing, just steady. Pale blue or white, hard to say. It got brighter as whatever it was kept rising. Nobody said anything for a while. We all just watched. The thing came up maybe 20, 30 feet out of the water. Not fast, almost like it was being lifted by a crane, if that makes sense. Smooth. Way too smooth. And it wasn't a perfect shape, not a sphere, not a disc. Kind of like a stretched out oval, maybe 10 feet tall, 15 feet wide. Hard to judge in the dark. It was rotating slowly, not spinning, just turning. Clockwise, I think. The light wasn't coming from a specific part of it. The whole thing sort of glowed evenly. It didn't reflect off the water like a spotlight would. It was more like the water just got less dark around it. After maybe a minute, the thing started going back down. Same speed, no noise, no splash when it submerged again. The surface just smoothed out like nothing had happened. We didn't talk for a bit after that. Gabe finally said, "Did you guys all see that?" We all said yes. No one was freaking out or yelling, just quiet. I think we were all trying to figure out if it had really happened. Dan reached for his phone, but he hadn't been filming. None of us had. It didn't feel like the kind of thing you could film anyway. The light didn't show up on the water the way a normal light would have. And the shape, it didn't cast shadows or have edges you could make sense of. We waited another half hour, drifting. Nothing else came up. No boats. No planes. Just the same glassy ocean and stars overhead. Eventually, Gabe started the engine and we headed back in. No one said much on the way. I remember looking back over the stern a lot, though, just in case. When we got back to the dock, Dan checked his phone again. He'd tried recording some audio while the thing was still above the water. He played it for us, just wind and low boat creaks. No hum, no splash, nothing strange. Ricky swore he'd felt a vibration in his chest when it was above the water. Said it was like standing next to a big speaker, only quieter. The rest of us hadn't felt anything. Next day, we all talked again. No one had dreamed it. No one had been drinking. No one had any new explanation. I don't know what it was. I've been on boats my whole life and never seen anything like that. Not before or since. I was out riding my bike late one night, something I'd done plenty of times before. I like the quiet, the way the streets feel different after midnight. Empty, calm, almost like the world's taking a breath. This night started the same. The air was cool but not cold, and the roads were empty except for me. I wasn't going far, just a loop I knew well, something to clear my head. I was probably about 10 miles into the ride when I first noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was just a car way behind me. The glow was faint but steady. 2 sets of headlights, nothing unusual, just far enough back to be out of sight in the distance. I figured it would pass me soon or turn off somewhere, but it didn't. As I pedaled, I glanced over my shoulder a couple of times. The lights stayed at the same distance behind me, matching my speed perfectly. I thought maybe it was someone just following the road too, going the same way. That happens sometimes, especially late at night. The thing was, the lights weren't acting like a car at all. No engine noise, no taillights, no change in brightness or angle, like headlights on a turn. They just stayed perfectly aligned with me, as if locked on. When I sped up a little, they sped up too. They sped up too. When I slowed down, they did the same. It was almost like they were watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just coincidence, maybe another cyclist with bright lights, or a car that was being extra careful behind me. But there wasn't a single sound to go with those lights, not even the faintest hum of an engine or tires on asphalt. After a few miles, I decided to stop at a red light. I slowed down, brought my bike to a halt, and looked back. The lights vanished instantly, like they disappeared into thin air. I waited a few seconds, heart starting to beat a little faster, then took off again. Right when I picked up speed, the lights reappeared a little ways back, falling into sync with my pace again. It was exactly the same as before. They mirrored every change I made, every turn I took. I tried to shake the feeling that something was off, but the way they matched me so precisely made my skin crawl. I rode through a couple of empty neighborhoods, streets lit only by dim street lamps and the occasional porch light. The lights stayed behind me the whole time. No sound, no headlights reflecting off anything else, just those 2 glowing points locked on. I started to check over my shoulder more often, trying to catch some detail that would explain it, but every time I looked, there was nothing but darkness where the lights should have been. At one point, I swerved sharply onto a side street to see if the lights would do the same. They did. They followed exactly. No lag, no difference in speed or direction. I wasn't imagining it. They were moving with me, matching me perfectly, but without any other sign of a vehicle or person. I began to feel genuinely uneasy, the kind of unsettled where your nerves tighten and your breath gets shallow. It was like being watched, but by something that didn't want me to see it. My hands gripped the handlebars tighter, and I found myself pedaling faster, hoping to lose whatever was behind me. The lights stayed with me. I took the long way home, cutting through back streets and alleys where the light was barely enough to see. The glow stayed steady just behind me, never moving closer, never falling behind. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of prank, maybe someone with a powerful flashlight on a bike or in a car, but nothing made sense. No sound, no visible vehicle, no reflections, nothing. When I finally reached my street, I slowed down again, coming to a stop at the corner. The lights vanished like before. I waited a minute, heart pounding, then looked back into the dark road. No sign of anything. I rode the last block home as fast as I could, locked my bike up, and went inside without looking back. I've thought about that night a lot. The lights that followed me matching every move, disappearing when I stopped. It wasn't a car, not a bike, nothing I could explain. The quiet, the way they moved, the total lack of any noise or reflection. It still feels off, like something was out there watching me but not wanting to be seen. I keep wondering if I'm crazy or if maybe I was just tired and imagining things. But I know what I saw. The lights were real, and they weren't just behind me by chance. I was out on the lake, alone, like I often am on weeknights. Fishing at night isn't exactly a popular thing where I live, so it's usually just me, my boat, and the water. That night was late September, maybe 10 or 11 o'clock. The air was cool but not cold, and the lake was calm. No wind, no waves, just still water that looked like glass under the moonlight. I'd been out there for a couple hours, just drifting, casting my line, waiting. The night was quiet, except for the occasional splash or the hum of insects near the shore. I wasn't really expecting anything unusual, just the usual peaceful fishing routine. Around 10:30, I looked up and noticed something odd near the far edge of the lake, close to where the trees meet the water. There was this cluster of lights, arranged in a perfect triangle, maybe 30 or 40 feet across. The lights weren't blinking or flashing, just steady, like little white LEDs, evenly spaced at the points of the triangle and one in the middle. They were low, almost touching the water's surface. At first, I thought maybe someone had set up a fishing float line with lights or something like that, but there was no boat or dock nearby, no signs of any activity. The lake surface around the lights was completely still, no ripples or waves at all, which felt strange because usually even a stationary light on the water would create some kind of disturbance. I grabbed my flashlight and tried to get a better look, pointing the beam toward the lights from a distance. As soon as the beam hit them, the whole formation vanished. No flash or flicker, just gone. It wasn't like they dimmed or turned off, they disappeared instantly, like someone switched them off remotely. I sat still for a minute, blinking and scanning the area, but the lights didn't come back. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, or it was some kind of reflection. So I moved the boat closer, edging toward where the lights had been, shining the flashlight around slowly. Nothing. Then, after a couple minutes, the lights reappeared in the exact same triangular pattern, in the same spot, just floating on the water, no source visible. They still didn't move or make a sound. I reached for my phone to try and get a picture, but the screen flickered oddly, like it was struggling to focus in the dark, then went completely black. I fiddled with it for a bit, and it finally came back on, but by then the lights were gone again. I stayed there for the next half hour, drifting around the area, shining my flashlight in short bursts toward where the lights had appeared. Each time I pointed the beam, they vanished. When I turned it off, they returned. No pattern, no warning, just gone and back, like they were responding directly to the light. The weird part was how quiet it all was. No engines, no boat noises, no voices. Even the water was still, like the triangle was hovering without disturbing anything. If it was a boat or some human setup, there'd be at least a ripple or wake, but there wasn't. Eventually, I decided to head back to shore. As I started the engine, I kept glancing back at the spot where the lights had been, but they didn't show up again. The water stayed calm and dark, like nothing had ever been there. On the ride home, I tried telling myself I'd imagined it, or that it was some kind of strange reflection or light trick on the water. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't normal. No boat, no gear, just that perfect triangle of lights floating silently on the water, disappearing whenever I shined a light on them. I've gone back to the lake a few times since then, usually the same time of night, hoping to see something again or maybe find a logical explanation. Nothing, just the usual quiet water, no lights, no ripples, no sound. I checked with the local marina and other fishermen. No one else reported anything like it. The area is pretty remote, no boat traffic that late at night. There's no reason for lights like that to be out there, especially arranged so precisely. Sometimes I wonder if I should have stayed longer, tried to get closer, or maybe called someone to see it with me. But something about the way those lights vanished whenever I shined my flashlight made me not want to push it, like I was being watched, but no one wanted me to see. That night feels like a blurred line between what I know and what I don't. I'm not sure what I saw, but it's stayed with me ever since. I was hiking alone in Central Oregon last summer, not too far from Sisters. I'd done that trail a few times before, but this time I decided to push deeper off the main loop just to see what was out there. I had my GPS watch, a paper map, and enough water and food for the day. It wasn't supposed to be anything big, just a long afternoon hike and back to my truck before dark. Around noon, I left the marked trail. There was a dry creek bed that ran east, and I figured I'd follow it for a bit before looping back. It was quiet, like unusually quiet. I didn't see any birds, and the wind had totally died. The only sound was my boots on the gravel and the occasional creak of the trees. About 45 minutes in, I stopped to eat and check my bearings. Everything seemed normal. My watch said I was about 3.5 miles from the trailhead, which made sense. I hadn't seen any other hikers since morning. No litter, no cairns, no blazes, just untouched forest. I kept going maybe another half hour, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a strange-looking tree. From a distance, it looked like it had been struck by lightning or maybe damaged by snow because the shape was all wrong. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't broken. It was deliberate. Every single branch from the trunk all the way up had been bent sharply upward at a right angle. Not snapped or hanging, bent cleanly like pipe, and they were all pointing straight up toward the sky. It didn't look natural. The branches weren't twisted or jagged, just this perfect 90-degree bend like they'd been softened and reshaped. Even the small ones, the twigs, every one of them was bent upward. No leaves on the tree either, but it was green beneath the bark, alive. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to figure out what I was looking at. I even walked around it a few times, looking for scorch marks or tool damage. Nothing. The bark wasn't stripped. No saw cuts, no evidence of people messing with it. Then I looked up. There was a faint hum in the air. Not loud, more like the feeling of sound than actual sound. Like when a big truck idles far off in the distance, but there's no engine noise, just pressure. I turned off my watch, thinking maybe it was buzzing, but it wasn't that. I took a few steps back and checked my phone, thinking I'd take a picture. That's when I noticed I had no service, not even emergency SOS, which didn't make sense because I had full bars earlier and hadn't gone that far. I tried to take a photo anyway, but the camera app glitched and froze. The screen stayed black and wouldn't respond. I had to force restart it, and even then it took forever to come back on. When it finally did, the battery had dropped from 82% to 19%. I hadn't used it at all since checking the map. I backed away from the tree, but the hum stayed with me. I looked around, trying to see if there was something else nearby. Power lines, a transformer, a plane overhead, but there was nothing. The sky was clear, no wind. The sun felt a little dim, though, like there was something between me and it, even though I couldn't see anything. I didn't want to be there anymore. I started heading back toward the creek bed, moving fast but trying not to panic. I kept checking over my shoulder, even though I didn't see or hear anything behind me. It just felt wrong, like the air was heavy. I passed a few trees that looked like they'd been burned long ago, black trunks, no underbrush, and realized I hadn't noticed them on the way in. That threw me off. I pulled out the map and tried to reorient myself, but the creek wasn't where I thought it should be. I walked another 10 minutes and never found it. Just more trees, all starting to look the same. At some point I stopped walking and just stood still, listening. Nothing. No birds, no bugs, no planes, just that low, pressure-like hum. And then it stopped, like someone hit a switch. The sudden silence was even worse. I decided to follow the slope downhill, figuring it would eventually lead to a road or the main trail. I kept my compass out, but the needle kept twitching slightly, like it couldn't settle on north. Not spinning wildly, just enough to notice. That's when I heard something above me. It wasn't a plane. It didn't have that Doppler shift or engine sound. It was more like a low whoosh, like a big piece of fabric being dragged slowly through the air. I looked up and didn't see anything. The sky was still clear, but the shadows on the ground didn't match. The light flickered for a few seconds, like something was moving between the sun and the trees, but nothing was there. I crouched down and waited. I didn't move for a long time, probably 15, 20 minutes. Eventually the light went back to normal. The warmth returned. Birds started chirping again, one at a time. I stood up and picked a direction. I didn't even try to find the trail at that point. I just wanted something, a road, a sign, a fence. After about an hour of hiking without stopping, I crossed a dirt path with tire tracks and followed it west. That finally led to a Forest Service road, and from there I was able to get a signal and call a friend. When I checked my watch, it said it was 5:23 p.m. I'd only planned to be out for about 5 hours, but the GPS log showed a 4-hour gap with no movement, just a single point, like I'd stood still the entire time. I don't remember stopping for more than a few minutes. I drove home that night and didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I tried to go back a few weeks later with a buddy, but we couldn't find the tree. We searched for hours and didn't even see the burned trunks I'd passed. The forest felt different, like it had shifted somehow. I still have the GPS track from my watch. It shows that weird static point way off the main trail, just sitting there like I was standing still for 4 hours. We were about an hour into the hike when we first saw it. Mara and I had gotten a late start. We were visiting her sister that weekend in Vermont, and we decided to try this near Groton that she'd bookmarked months ago. Real quiet place. No one else on the lot when we parked, and we didn't see a single person the whole way up. Trail was steep, but nothing crazy. Mostly pine and fir all the way. She was a little nervous about the time, since the sun was already starting to dip, but I told her we'd make it to the lookout and back, with plenty of daylight left. Around halfway up, there's this bend where the trees thin out just enough to get a decent view of the hills across the valley. The sun was low and throwing this orange light across everything, and for a second I thought that was what caught my eye, just the color of the trees shifting. But then I saw the shape. It was on the far side of the ridge, black, huge, like a triangle. That's all I could think to call it, a flat triangle. No markings, no lights, no sound, just gliding, steady, maybe 100 feet above the tree line. I tapped Mara's shoulder and pointed. She saw it too. We just stood there, both squinting through the branches, trying to make sense of what we were looking at. It was moving slow, not hovering exactly, but not flying like a plane would. No tilt or wings or anything like that. It didn't reflect any light either. The sunset was hitting the tops of the trees below it, but this thing stayed pitch black, like it was absorbing the light. I pulled out my phone, but by the time I got the camera up, it was already sliding behind the ridge, gone in maybe 10 seconds. I didn't even snap a photo. Just stared, waiting for it to reappear, but it never did. We kept hiking. I think we both wanted to reach the lookout to see if it was maybe headed that way, or if we'd get a better angle. But we didn't talk about it much. Mara asked once, "Did you hear anything?" I said no, and that was it. The air had gone dead silent while we watched it, but it didn't seem weird at the time. Only later did that part start to bother me. About 20 minutes later, we reached the top. There's a flat rocky area that opens up with a view across the whole valley. You can see for miles. We both looked right where we thought the thing was headed. Nothing. We stood there scanning the sky, turning in circles, thinking maybe it had moved behind another hill or we'd catch a glimpse of it in the distance. But the sky was clear. No clouds, no contrails, no sound. Just blue fading to purple as the sun dropped. The trees below were still, no wind at all. I don't remember hearing any birds either. We waited up there longer than we meant to. Maybe 20 minutes, maybe more. The light kept fading, and I could tell Mara wanted to head back, but neither of us said anything. I kept thinking I'd see it again, that maybe if I waited just one more minute, I'd catch a corner of it poking out behind a ridge or a shadow crossing the treetops, but it was like it'd never been there at all. We finally started heading back. The trail got darker fast, trees close in tight near the top, and once the sun's gone, it feels like night hits all at once. We had flashlights in our packs, but we didn't turn them on right away. Just walked in the dim, both quiet. I kept checking the sky through the gaps in the branches. I don't know what I was expecting, some kind of movement, a blink of light, anything. But the sky was empty, no stars yet. Just this blank, darkening space that felt way too quiet. Then, maybe 10 minutes into the descent, we both stopped at the same time. I didn't hear anything at first. That's what was weird. I stopped because she stopped. I looked at her, and she was staring up through the trees behind us, mouth slightly open. There was a sound now, low, deep, not a rumble exactly, but close, a slow, vibrating hum, more felt than heard, like a bass note coming from inside your chest. It didn't come from ahead of us or behind, it came from above. We both turned our lights on. The beam lit up the trunks around us, branches swaying just a little, but when I tilted mine up, the light stopped, like it hit something. I thought it was just fog at first, or maybe my flashlight wasn't cutting through the air right, but it felt more solid than that. The light just didn't go far. It was like shining it at a wall. There was a shape above the trees, not lit, not moving, just a blackness darker than the sky. I couldn't see an edge, just the impression of something massive just hanging there. The hum kept going. We didn't say anything. I think we both thought the same thing. Don't run, don't talk. Just keep walking. We moved fast but steady the rest of the way down. Neither of us looked up again. That part I remember clearly. We both kept our heads down like we didn't want to draw attention to ourselves, like it might notice. By the time we got back to the car, the sound was gone. It faded as we got closer to the lot, but it didn't trail off like a normal noise would. It was just suddenly not there. We got in and drove without saying anything. It wasn't until we were back on the main road about 10 minutes out that Mara asked if I'd seen it again in the trees. I told her yeah, or at least something blocking the stars. She nodded and didn't say anything else. I checked the news later that night. Weather sites, flight tracking apps, even some local forums. Nothing. No reports of low-flying aircraft, no power outages, no strange lights. No one else posted anything about it. I asked her the next morning if she thought we should report it somewhere. She just looked at me and said, "And say what?" We didn't talk about it again after that. I keep trying to make sense of it, but there's nothing to grab onto. No clear memory of what it was, just this massive thing moving silent above the trees. Too big to miss, too quiet to be real, like it didn't belong in the same world we were standing in. I was driving back from my brother's place in Franklin. It took longer than I expected, and I ended up on those back roads between towns around midnight. I'd driven that way plenty of times, so I wasn't too worried. Just me and the occasional deer on the shoulder. The fog started thickening maybe 15 minutes out from home. Not the rolling kind that drifts in patches. This was the low, dense stuff that clings to the road. It came in fast. 1 second I could see the tree line. Next, it was just the hood of the car and nothing beyond. I slowed down, not just for the visibility, but because something about it didn't feel right. The headlights were getting swallowed up way too fast. I kept glancing down at the speedometer to make sure I wasn't creeping too slow or too fast, but the road had gone weirdly quiet. No engine hum, no gravel crunch. I rounded a curve near an old dairy farm. That spot where the fencing's all half collapsed and there's that leaning oak on the right, and that's when the light showed up. Just there. No flicker, no build. 1 second, just fog. The next, blinding white light directly in front of my windshield. Not up ahead, right in front of me, like I'd driven into a floodlight mounted to an invisible wall. I slammed the brakes, didn't even think. Everything was white. I could see nothing else. Not the dashboard, not my hands, just light. Like it filled the whole cabin. It wasn't warm, it didn't make a sound, but it pressed in on me, like being underwater but dry and frozen still. I blinked a few times, held my hand up in front of my face. Nothing, just solid white. I don't know how long it lasted. Could have been 5 seconds, could have been a full minute. But then, just like that, it was gone. Dark again. Not a slow fade, like someone shut off a switch. My eyes were useless for a few seconds after that, totally shot. I sat there in the middle of the road, gripping the wheel, not sure if I was about to get rear-ended or what. When I could finally see again, I looked around. No lights anywhere. The road behind me was empty. No headlights, no glow in the fog, just my low beams cutting through a few feet of soup. The air in the car felt weird. Not hot, not cold, just heavy. Stale, maybe, like I'd been sitting with the windows up in a parking lot all day. I rolled one down and took a breath. Fog poured in. I started driving again, slower than before. The road felt different. I know how that sounds, but I swear the curve that should have come next wasn't where it normally was. I was so sure I'd missed a turn that I pulled over and checked Google Maps. According to GPS, I was still on County Route 12, on track, but something felt off. A few minutes later, I passed a billboard I didn't recognize, completely blank, just a white panel, no text, no image, no logo. I slowed down to look at it, and it looked brand new. Not weathered, not faded, just blank. I looked it up later. There's never been a billboard on that stretch, nothing in Street View history. As I got closer to town, the fog started to clear. By the time I hit the stoplight near the gas station, it was completely gone. Like someone drew a line in the air, behind me, thick as soup. Ahead of me, clear as day. I pulled into my driveway just after 12:30. The weirdest part, my car clock said 12:34, my phone said 1:07. I double-checked it against the microwave inside. 1:07 there too. I didn't stop for gas, didn't pull over longer than a minute. That drive should have taken 20-25 minutes, tops. I don't remember losing time, I don't remember pulling over. I didn't fall asleep, but something ate up that half hour. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was scared, just unsettled. I kept going over it in my head, trying to think of an explanation that made sense. A security light, a truck's high beams through the fog, but nothing fit. The light was right in front of me, like it came from nowhere, like it was inside the fog. A few days later, I drove that road again. Same time of night. Clear skies, no fog. I passed the dairy farm, slowed down at the same curve. No sign of anything unusual. The blank billboard wasn't there either, just an open field. I've driven that stretch at least a dozen times since. Never seen the light again. Never had that time discrepancy again. But I haven't taken that road in the fog since. If I see it starting to roll in, I take the highway, even if it adds 15 minutes. Just doesn't feel worth it. I run almost every evening after work. Same loop through the edge of the neighborhood, down past the nature trail, and back along the golf course path. It's quiet, and by 7 or 8, there's hardly anyone out. I track everything on my smartwatch. Pace, heart rate GPS, even audio logs sometimes. It's just a habit now. Helps me unwind. That night wasn't any different. I left the house around 8:15, just after sunset. The sky was still pink around the edges, but fading fast. It had rained earlier, so everything smelled damp and fresh. The air was cooler than usual. I remember because I thought I might need a light jacket and decided against it. About a mile in, I cut off the sidewalk and onto the trail like usual. It winds behind some houses, then dips into a narrow wooded area, just a strip of trees between the subdivisions. I've taken it 100 times. I know where every bump in the path is. I had music playing through my earbuds, but not loud. I like to hear what's around me, just in case. Footsteps, bikes, dogs. It was mostly quiet. A few birds still going. One car passed on the road to the east, but that was it. I remember checking my watch right before I hit the half-mile mark on the trail. Everything was normal. Heart rate in the 130s. Pace a little slower than usual, but not by much. I kept moving. Then, it was like I blinked and was somewhere else on the path. Not far, maybe 20 feet ahead of where I thought I'd been, but it felt wrong, like I'd skipped something. I was mid-stride, but I had no memory of taking the steps that got me there. I stopped. I actually stood still for a second and looked around. Same trail, same trees, but something felt quiet. Too quiet. The music had cut out, just static in the buds. I pulled one out and listened. Static. Faint, like a radio not quite tuned in. I looked at my watch. It said I was paused. Not stopped. Paused. That only happens when I hold down the side button, which I hadn't done. I tapped to resume and checked the runtime. It showed 34 minutes and change. That didn't make sense. I should have only been 20 minutes in, tops. I opened the run history and saw the pause, 12 minutes, 17 seconds. Right in the middle of the route. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I stood there longer than I probably should have, trying to figure out if I'd zoned out or something. Maybe I took a break and forgot, but I wasn't out of breath. I wasn't tired. There was no place on that stretch to sit or lean unless I'd wandered into the brush. I looked down at the ground around me. It was damp and undisturbed, no footprints, no sign I'd stood there for 12 minutes. Nothing weird, just pine needles and gravel. I kept going, slower now. I felt uneasy, like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to be in. The trees seemed closer than they usually did. Taller, maybe, or just leaning more than I remembered. About a minute later, the static in my earbuds cut out. Total silence, like they'd died. But when I checked my phone, it still showed the music playing. I paused it and unpaused it. Nothing. I tried skipping tracks. Still nothing. I pulled both buds out and just listened. There were no bugs, no wind, no birds. It was dead quiet. That's when I realized I couldn't even hear the highway. And I'm always able to hear at least a hum from that direction. Even when the trees are thick, the sound carries. I felt watched. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly how it felt. Not like someone was behind me, more like something was very aware of me being there. I picked up the pace, no full sprint or anything, but enough that I felt like I was moving away from whatever that feeling was. When I finally came out the other end of the trail and hit the sidewalk again, the normal sounds came back all at once, like someone turned up the volume. Crickets, distant traffic, a plane overhead. I stopped right there under a streetlight and tried to replay what had just happened. I opened the audio recording on my phone. Don't always record, but for some reason I had that night. Probably something to do with testing a new app setting. It should have had the whole run. It was there. 44 minutes total. But from 22:03 to 34:20, it was nothing but static. Not silence, static. Low, glitchy hissing with occasional high-pitched pops. Like a broken speaker trying to process something it wasn't built to understand. I played it again. Same result. The GPS track on my app showed the same weird thing. A pause right in the middle of the woods. My little blue line just stops in place for over 12 minutes, then starts up again like nothing happened. I walked the rest of the way home, checking over my shoulder more times than I'd admit. I didn't feel right until I was back inside with the door locked. I backed up the audio file. I still have it. Every time I listen to it, I think maybe I'll hear something I missed. But it's just noise, not even rhythmic, just broken sound. The watch never glitched like that again. I even used the same route. But I haven't taken that trail at night since. Not alone.